Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Town Council meeting for October 18th, 2016. If you haven't already done so, please silence your devices. And Madam Clerk, if you will please call the roll.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Rob Reddy.
Here.
Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mariko Sayoc.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. At this point, I would ask that Hillbrook School student Brady Munnerlin, yeah, got it right, okay, if you'll come on up. We have to give you room here. Let me tell you a little bit about Brady. He's going to be leading us in the pledge this evening, but Brady is an 8th grader at Hillbrook School. He plays soccer for the Los Gatos United, and his favorite subject in school is history. He has done a lot of community service, but the one that stood out for me because it just seemed so daunting was that he did the Lexington Reservoir cleanup. And so then I have these facts about him, but I asked him, I always try and think of some general question. Tell me, what is the most interesting thing that you've done this year? And he goes, in the past year? And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, I traveled. And I go, so where did you go? He said, well, I traveled for the first time. And I said, well, where did you go? In April, he traveled in China. So I thought that was a pretty cool experience, and so did he. So I'm going to give him our microphone here, and if you could stand and lead us in the pledge.
Okay. Ready, set, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Have you introduce you to all the council members. Let's give them a round of applause. Once a month, we here at the council have the opportunity to recognize and applaud our small business big applause. That's what we call it. It's a business that has served Los Gatos for a long time, generally over 25 years or thereabouts, and has been low-key but has served our community well. This evening, I would like to call forward any representatives here of our Business of the Month, Bunches. Is anybody here representing Bunches? Come on up. Before I start talking about Bunches, I'm going to let you start down here and tell me who you are and what you do at Bunches and how long you've been there.
I'm Marilyn Starr. I've been with Bunches for 16 years, and I'm a counter person. I'm waiting on all these people in Los Gatos, helping them pick out flowers and arrangements for them, and it couldn't be a better experience in my life.
And I'm Katrina. I've only worked there for a couple months, but I moved here from Austin, Texas, and it's been a great introduction to California. Wonderful people, wonderful place.
And I'm Christy, and I've been there for a couple of months, and I am a clerk person and a floral designer.
My name is Rodney. I started in July, and I'm one of the designers, I guess. Yeah?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm one of the designers, and yeah, it's been great.
I'm David. I've been at Bunches for 9 months now. I'm now the lead. Bunches is a great place. I have 27 years of experience designing. It's just like family, so it's really a great place.
Hi, I'm Pauline. I'm also a designer there, and I've been there for almost a year. And as you can see, it's kind of like a new staff, except for Marilyn, and but it's great. Everything's kind of changing, but for the better, and it just feels good. It's a good group, and we love Nancy and Roger. They can't be here. They get up so early. They come over from Watsonville every morning, 7 days a week, and so, we're here representing them.
Well, Roger said that they wouldn't be coming because they go back over the hill at 1 o'clock because they come over here sometime when it's like really dark at some early a.m. But they said that they didn't tell me you would all be here. I think that's really cool. Actually, what I have learned is that this is the second time that Bunches has won the Small Business Big Applause Award. And this time there is something new that has happened. This past summer, I think it was in June, the Bay Area News Group awarded Los Gatos the best downtown shopping area, and it said its chain stores blended easily with its independents, and then it gave an example of those independents with which they blended, and they used 2 examples, and Bunches was one of those examples. So that caused them to get this award again. And before I hand it to them, I'm not going to read you the whole. This is a commendation signed by all of the members of the council. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it references the fact that Bunches was established in downtown Los Gatos 24 years ago by Roger and Nancy Coppolillo. Yes, I should know that. It's Italian. And then the last paragraph says, whereas a trip to Bunches is not complete without visiting the rear entrance to say hello to Pete the Duck, typically found perched on the counter or soaking her feathers in a sink of fresh water before greeting customers of all ages. So let's give this wonderful business a round of applause. And I think you want me to give them the proclamation so you can take their picture. Yes, okay. Thank you. Come on in. Come here, Marilyn. Over there, Marilyn. Thank you. Another round of applause. Going on with our agenda. Next item, closed session report. Mr. Town Attorney.
Yes, good evening. Prior to tonight's regular session, council met in closed session to discuss labor negotiations and existing litigation. As to both of these items, no action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. Council Town Manager reports, beginning with council reports. Ms. Jensen.
I have nothing to report.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I have several things here. Starting on October 5th, I attended a 3-day League of Cities conference in Long Beach. I attended the keynote speeches, conference information sessions, and voted on the General Assembly resolutions. Notes from these sessions were sent to the town manager and have been shared with other council members. On October 10th, I attended the Ad Hoc Parking and Infrastructure committee with the mayor. On October 12th, I attended the board meeting for the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority, and among other things, we approved a negotiated agreement with PG&E to deliver the power we buy and to bill the customers for us. We also approved a contract with Noble Energy to provide call center and data management services, so you know what's going on there. Also, significant accomplishments with them. 15 of the largest commercial customers in the county have opted for early enrollment. Of those, some are direct access, meaning they don't even go through PG&E. So of the 8 of 10 that are not direct, of the 10 largest, 8 of the non-direct access have opted. And also 3 have opted up to the green power option, which is 100% renewable versus just 100% carbon-free. On October 13th, I attended the VTA PAC, that's Policy Advisory Committee, and one thing of note was a drop in ridership for both light rail and buses this year versus last year. And also they created a scoring criteria that was that's being recommended to the board for scoring the county bike path projects. And then also on October 13th, later that day, I attended the Cities Association board meeting where we had a legislative discussion with Assemblyman Lowe and a homelessness discussion.
Thank you. Since the last council meeting, between October 7th and 10th in Los Gatos, we had what is called the Listowel Literary event. And for those of you who do not know, Listowel is one of Los Gatos' sister cities. And I personally, as mayor, attended the kickoff at C.B. Hannigan's on October 7th, and also the opening night reception at New Mew on October 8th. A very interesting thing that I experienced as it relates to the vitality of Los Gatos is in both these instances when I was making my presentation as mayor, individuals kept coming in to wherever I was, and these individuals were coming generally from either San Francisco, where they had a large Irish contingency, or they were coming off of Aer Lingus, where they had come directly from Ireland to these events. It was pretty cool and pretty amazing. This past Friday, along with the town manager, I attended the West Valley Mayor-Manager meeting, where the mayors all updated one another on the individuals and issues on the November calendar. And then yesterday, again, I was invited as mayor and attended the opening of our new Superior Court. Ms. Sayak.
Thank you. Since we last met, 2 items to report. One was I attended the preschool story time where our librarians tested my singing and dancing skills. And Councilmember Johnson and I also have had 2 policy committee meetings. Several of those items are on our agenda for today.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Since our last meeting, I also sang and read to the children at story time in the library. And I attended 2 meetings regarding sanitation, one for the West Valley Sanitation District Board of Directors. It's a general business meeting with 1 closed session item. And then I attended the Treatment Plant Advisory Committee in San Jose City Hall, and I have nothing to report.
Thank you. Thank you all. At this point on our agenda, we don't do the consent calendar, do we? Do the manager matters.
Thank you. I just have 3 items to report to you this evening. First of all, we're getting ready for Halloween. So Neighbors on Tape will be receiving a letter from our police department advising that we will be closing the street as we have in years past to ensure safety of our children. We are also underway with the Bachman Street improvements, and we're working with the contractor to make sure that things are going to be safe again for our kids as they do their trick-or-treating on Halloween. We are underway with board and commission recruitment, so we are encouraging members of our community to sign up. Almost every board and commission has an opening, so there's something for everyone. And third, we are working with the water company to set up a meeting to discuss the recent water bills. Thank you.
Thank you. And with regard to that last meeting, once it's organized by staff, I assume there will be a public outreach of some sort?
Yes, there will be.
All right, thank you. We are now at the consent calendar portion of our agenda. These this evening consist of agenda items 1 through 4. They will be voted on on one motion unless somebody from the council or somebody from the community wishes to pull an item from the agenda. I'll first look to council. Does anyone wish to pull a consent item from the agenda? Seeing no one, I don't have any cards, but does anyone from the community wish to pull an item from our agenda? Seeing no one, I'm looking to the council for a motion. Ms. Jensen.
Move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 4.
Second.
We have dueling seconds. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I want to just point out that under item 3, the flag policy, we did provide an alternative policy, so I just want to make sure we know which one the council has just approved, if it's the one that was contained in yesterday's addendum or the original version.
I assumed it was the updated one, but Mr. Rennie?
I assumed also.
The motion was assuming the updated policy.
Thank you.
And I heard that that was what the Vice Mayor assumed and Mr. Leonardis? Yes. Okay. Verbal communications. This is the opportunity for anyone here to address the council for 3 minutes on any item that is not on this evening's agenda. I am asking, or we do ask, that you submit a card, and I do have cards, and the first one is John Shepherdson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. John Shepherdson, 120 Oak Rim. I just want to cover a number of points that on various topics. But first, a comment on bunches. I think it's wonderful. I use it myself. Sometimes I just walk through it for the aroma. Secondly, Saratoga was able to obtain a $25,000 grant for a super fast electric charge station, which they're placing in their library. And that's something that I suggest that our town may pursue, that kind of grant money, and perhaps in a location like the library. Third point is military has something that's called after-action reports, and that is to look at what occurred and see if we can learn something from the experience. And I suggest that on some of our major projects that perhaps after everything is completed, that we perhaps prepare a report so that town councils in the future can see what occurred with that project and what can we learn from that. Next point is I notice on North Santa Cruz Avenue, I'm delighted to see children gathering those flags and walking across the street. And it's a good feeling, and it feels safe, and the kids like it. And I think it's something that's been a good move by the town. Next point, I suggest that we set up a finance committee involving citizens that looks at revenue as well as expenses for the town budget. I noticed that kids seem to be biking more, so kudos to people like Maria Risto that are promoting the Safe Routes to Schools program. Mr. Rennie, you mentioned the energy program. I didn't hear all of it because I was writing notes, but that sounds good, and I think it's good progress in terms of what we're doing there. And I think this is a good point to mention. These little really cool things, like I was walking into the council chambers, and I noticed to the right, the museum downstairs, kids were like looking at these white plaster masks. So they're creating some really cool artistic stuff. Last thing is suggestion of perhaps we enter into a friendly and fierce competition with Saratoga to see who can reduce their greenhouse emissions and maybe perhaps one day get to carbon neutral. With that, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I know this just because, it's Ed, and I can't see the last name because I know the last name, but I can't read it on your writing. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I apologize for my handwriting. Well, good evening. My name is Ed Morimoto. I live at 460 Monterey Avenue. Yesterday, I received a notice for the October 28th special meeting of the General Plan Committee to consider amendments to the North 40 specific plan. When this council convened a special hearing on September 27th to consider amendments to the plan on the heels of the denial of the North 40 Phase 1 application, some, such as myself, wondered about the appropriateness of the town's haste in light of a possible lawsuit. Since then, that possibility has become a reality, and I am speaking tonight asking you to deeply question the virtue of further investment in amending the North 40 specific plan at this time. Now, as you know, I am not indifferent with regards to the question of whether the specific plan should be amended at all, and I understand the sense of urgency some may have to do so. However, I do not believe, given the uncertainty of the North 40 Phase 1 application and the pending lawsuit, it is possible to make thoughtful amendments to the plan until it is resolved. After nearly 8 years of work on the current specific plan, with all of its investment in time, consultants, studies, and debate, those who believe the plan should be amended are saying it's still not right. So what chance does an amendment process have of succeeding if fundamental questions such as whether this new plan will apply to the North 40 or just the North 20, if 270 housing units of the allotted North 40 capacity are spoken for or not? In a time when we face so many important issues, such as beach traffic, the downtown parking shortage, and dealing with a massive unfunded pension liability in the face of declining sales tax revenue, I believe we cannot afford to squander valuable staff, commission, public, and council time on an effort that isn't set up to succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Angelia Dorner, and that's the last card I have, so if you want to talk to us, please submit a card.
Hello, Angelia Dorner, proud resident of the Almond Grove, and just wanted to say that I'm looking forward to the meeting on October 28th. I think that it's important for the General Plan Committee to have things fresh on their mind as it relates to potential, not necessarily that amendments will be done, but the potential amendments might be considered. There are a lot of other acreage and a lot of other considerations that I think can be thought through proactively and not wait until other applications get submitted and we have lost our opportunity. Now, what I came up here to speak about is that it's time for Halloween, and I'm glad that the town manager has introduced the concept of Tate being closed. The Almond Grove is known for its Halloween celebrations, and if any of you have not gone in a while, it is not just a big party, it is a production. There are stages set up, there are major costumes, it's a really major event. And just this week, we received a map from the police department, and this is the one that I used last year as well as the year before. The red indicating the streets to be closed, the purple indicating the streets of the Almond Grove that are not going to be closed, and the orange representing the public parks, public parking lots, which are closest to the major access routes into the Almond Grove. I am just asking once again to please consider closing Wilder Avenue and not let people even enter the Almond Grove at the intersections of Santa Cruz, Bachman, Nicholson, and Bean. There is nowhere for those cars to go. Most of these people are from out of town. They zoom around Santa Cruz. They see that they're being cut off at Wilder. They turn left. They have no regard whatsoever for all the kids that are in the street. They rarely stop at Nicholson, and they have the same zooming around concept down at the end of Bean. It's extremely dangerous. These streets are really, really dark. Not only that, when people come from the parking lots, we are not talking onesies, twosies. We're talking families. We're talking groups of 4, 5, 8, sometimes a dozen or more, mostly including small children. And I just really think it's really dangerous. I did have an opportunity prior to the meeting to talk to Lieutenant JR, who I will be meeting with tomorrow to discuss this further, and I look forward to that opportunity. My primary emphasis is safety for the children and for the families who are visiting this residency or this neighborhood. I also just want to alert people that we have new curb ramps along Bachman in connection with the new construction that could pose significant tripping hazards. So especially with your long costumes, please be sure to pin them up safely. Come on down, have a wonderful time. We look forward to having you. And if you haven't done it in a while, please come on down. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sayak. Oh, we may have a question.
Actually, it's more of staff.
Right. Staff question. Go ahead.
Ms. Pravetti, do you mind just clarifying the date of the General Plan Committee? I have on my calendar 27th, but I've been hearing 28th.
It is Thursday, the 27th of October.
Okay. And if you could just clarify, no decisions will be predetermined, right? The General Plan Committee is looking at this and they will have their discretion on how to move forward?
Well, the process is set in terms of the General Plan Committee making a recommendation. What they will be doing is considering all of the suggestions that were brought forward by the council at the special meeting in September. And they will be making their recommendations, and then the package will move forward to public hearings before Planning Commission, and then again in front of yourselves as council.
Okay, thank you.
We have other questions? It looks like not. We are now at public hearings. Our first public hearing is Agenda Item 5, to adopt an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Town Code Chapter 14, Article 11, massage therapy establishments and massage therapy practitioners. I don't have any cards on this, but while people figure out whether or not they're going to testify, I'll go to staff for a report.
Good evening, Mayor. Based on time limitations, we do not have the ordinance in front of you tonight. Researching new state law that's going into effect and state law that was actually being phased out. So I still need additional time to bring forward the ordinance to you, the amendments to the massage ordinance. So therefore, we're asking that council continue this to a date certain, which is November 1st. And at that time, we should have the ordinance ready for review and for public comment. You certainly can ask the public if they do have any public comment for tonight and take that before you make the motion to continue it.
And are you suggesting that we entertain public comment this evening, if any, and also again when this, the date to which it's continued?
Yes, definitely at the date continued it would be, and certainly if there was someone already here to speak on this item, I would suggest you give them the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, I don't have any cards, but does anyone wish to address us on this agenda item? Seeing no one coming forward, I will look to the council. Ms. Jensen.
Move that we continue this matter to November 1st, 2016 in order to consider any kind of changes to our current ordinances regarding the subject matter to conform with state law.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We are now on other business. Agenda item 6. Authorize the town manager to issue a request for proposal, RFP, for the sale of the property on Dittos Lane, APN 52929-034. Staff report. Yes, first of all, staff report.
Good evening, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. A quick staff report for you on this. Dittos Lane property was purchased by the former redevelopment agency for approximately $3.1 million with the intent of developing it for below market residential use. The property has a time limit associated with its procurement by the redevelopment agency that expires in the middle of next year, at which point there is a risk that the state may take that property back as a redevelopment asset. The redevelopment agency was unsuccessful in developing the property due to access limitations and concerns over the density of the development. The property does indeed have access challenges with no legal access, and the width of a prescriptive easement that exists is fairly narrow and limits the type of development that could occur on the property. The RFP that we have before you allows for two considerations. One is a market rate sale of the property. The alternative is a below market proposal that potential developers would provide to the town. and allows for the council to weigh the proposals against each other and make a decision once those proposals are received on which is the most advantageous proposal to the town. So it's not necessarily a price determinative proposal that you're looking for. Of course, any development will need to proceed through the town's standard development processes in the future, regardless of the direction that the council chooses in the future. Again, this is an RFP to solicit proposals from private developers for the property, and the council will make an ultimate decision at a later point on what to do with the property. You do have a desk item and an addendum with this property, providing some information from local residents, and that concludes the staff report.
Thank you. Mr. Morley, you made mention in your report of the potential of the state taking the property back sometime, let's say, mid-2017. Can you just explain to us the potential ramifications of the state taking it back?
If the state were to take the property back, the town loses the opportunity to be decisive in the future use of the property. So that it becomes something where the town would lose control over or potentially lose control over the future of the property. That's not necessarily guaranteed. If the state were just to sell it again, it would have to go through the town's development processes. However, the state could do something unusual with it that the town would have no control over, and that's what we're seeking to avoid.
Thank you. Other questions of staff? Ms. Jensen.
I have a couple, if I may. What is the ability of the town to retain that property for its own use? So, for example, park, something that goes with the Creek Trail. I know that when the council, whenever it was, many years ago, voted to purchase that property, they were using funds for redevelopment for affordable housing. So can the town now retain that property without some penalty?
If the town were to retain that property, it would need to compensate for the value of the property that it was purchased for, so the $3.1 million, unless the town were to develop it for the below market use.
Okay, when you say compensate, you mean pay the state $3.1 million?
It would pay into the town's below market housing fund.
But $3.1 million?
$3.1 million, and those funds would need to come from the town sources, so from a general fund source.
And can the property be traded for another property in town? So, for example, there's other properties that we considered for affordable housing. Could we trade another town property so that there's a swap and affordable housing is actually done without paying into that fund?
The town could do that if it was an equitable swap.
Okay. So you told me the cost was $3.1 million. If we retained it ourselves, then we're going to have to find the $3 million. Is that it?
That's correct.
Basically. If we build fewer housing units than were contemplated with the sale originally, when the town bought it, whenever it was, remind me when it was, 2003 or? Yeah,
that's about right.
Okay. So did it promise a certain amount of units such that if the property were to be developed at 2 affordable units, would the town owe, quote unquote, units somewhere else?
No, as long as the town were to, when the property was purchased, it was purchased with a broader develop it for below market use, and not for a number of units. So as long as the town was using it, developing it for that use, there would be no need to compensate.
One final question. The town is entering into negotiations with a developer for development of a parking garage downtown, which potentially includes affordable units. If the town put affordable units there, would it still have a $3.1 million obligation for the Ditto's Lane purchase?
The affordable units on the garage are meeting an obligation for another property that was purchased for the same with the same affordable requirements on it, and that's the corner lot on Linden and Main Street.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So to follow on a little bit on that question, what if we built or allowed 3 low-income units to be built and then we took some of the land to build a park? Would we owe any money then?
Potentially, yes, because we are not using the entire property for affordable housing, which is what we purchased it for. It's something we could look into as to how we would value that property and what the benefit is to the affordable housing component if that's where we headed. But potentially, yes, there might be a general fund subsidy that would have to occur.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Sayak?
Thank you. A couple questions also on this. On the staff report under market rate offer, you put in that we would be selling the property as is. Is that with is that disclosure of the easement issues that the town originally had problems with?
Yeah, all that information will all be disclosed, yes.
And if you could remind me, what was the unit number that triggered requiring widening of that? Of I think was it Ditto's Lane, or what was the primary access considered?
Yeah, so Ditto's Lane, which is not it's a private way, it's not a town street, is the access point, and the number of units that are potentially developable there with that restriction is 2 or 4, and that's yet to be determined, which is one of the reasons why we're selling it as an as-is, so that can be determined through the development process.
And my final question, if you could remind me, is this not through the surplus process that we normally use our properties with? This is now market rate, and it could be used for. We're bypassing the three.
We did go through there's a California Government Code, Code 54222, that requires that we notify certain entities, including school districts and below market housing organizations that might want to develop it. We did go through that process and received no interest on this particular property. That does not preclude us from continuing to look for below market opportunities.
Okay, that was thank you.
Ms. Jensen.
My question is with respect to the property going back to the state. I'm assuming that the state, even if we lost some degree of local control, would be constrained by the same problems with the easement and the access as any other entity that bought the property, so that if it went through the town's development processes, the town could say to the state, we do not agree with putting cement in the creek and widening that area, etc., and they would have to take that up with us, correct? Or can they just say, fine, we're bulldozing it?
So certainly as a superior agency, the state can override us on certain things. For example, they could be the lead agency for CEQA, but they certainly would still have to deal with private property rights for easements, but we would lose control over CEQA and even permitting. They would probably even try to invoke certain superior agency jurisdiction. But we have a plan. We've met the state obligations, and that plan provides us with either the opportunity, and our plan was to do an affordable housing project or to sell it or to buy it with general funds. So we've listed out for them. So, as long as we continue to move forward in trying to do something with that, the state's not going to step in and take the property back. We've met our first obligation, which was to have that plan in place, and we've already done that. That was done last year and approved by the state. So we've met our deadlines as to having the plan in place, and only if we didn't execute on that plan somewhere way down the line would then the state step in.
Other questions? I don't have any cards, but this is a public testimony item. Does anyone wish to address us on this item? No one coming forward. I will now look to the council for questions, motion, discussion. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I think we need to go forward with the RFP as highlighted in attachment 1, so go with the staff recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion, second, discussion. Seeing, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Opposed?
No.
All right, the motion passes 4-1. Ms. Jensen voting no. Agenda item 7. Receive the report on traffic and parking around schools. Staff report.
Thank you very much. I'll change it up and present this one from over here. Thank you. So with the 2014-15 budget, the council set aside about $100,000 to do a traffic study on traffic and parking around schools. We worked through agreements with various partners, and one of the key highlights here is that the partnerships that that have grown since that time have been key. So there's definitely a strong partnership and a developing partnership with the Safe Routes to Schools effort. The school districts, Los Gatos Unified, the high school, and Hillbrook have been very strong partners, and Los Gatos Montesano Police Department and Parks and Public Works have been very active in engaging as partners to ensure continued success, not only of this study, but of the efforts in general around traffic and ensuring safety around schools. So outreach with this process was very key for us. During the study period, there was outreach that was done at each of the schools. Tables were set up at the schools to receive input from the public. There were community meetings that were held in the evening at the schools to provide opportunities for parents to come after work and provide input. And there were several report outs to the various commissions of transportation and parking commissions in the BPAC to ensure that input was provided through those organizations as well. One of the key elements that grew out of the program was the development of walk and roll to school maps, and these were key in identifying the safest routes for kids to get to and from their schools. This was one of the items that was fast-tracked during the project, so that these were able to be distributed to the children and their families ahead of school entering session this year, and were key for interactions there. One of the things that the report did that was innovative was it included density maps that identified exactly where students lived. So these blue dots identify a concentration of students throughout the town. With that, we're able to overlay those onto the walk and roll to school maps and to identify where the most kids are coming to and from the school, and that will help us to identify projects as we continue to move this forward. So as those projects are being identified, and this is a little bit fine-grained here, and they're in your packet for other review, but we receive plan line diagrams. Plan line diagrams are significant roadways that have a number of improvement projects along that roadway. And those improvement projects provide the guidance for a holistic look at these particular roadways and doing improvements to accommodate the improvements that are the work that is necessary to ensure the routes continue to be safe. And then we get even more granular from these, and we're able to take a look at the individual projects. And the text. Thanks, Shannon. The important part with the projects is a couple of the key elements. So these sections describe exactly what needs to be done on the roadways and how to get that work done. It also provides a budget estimate, so the budget estimate will help as we're creating our future CIP project lists. And the most innovative thing I think here is something that was very simple, but I think very effective, and that's the at-a-glance look at what modes are impacted. So the little symbols to the top right of each of the projects identifies the bicycles, pedestrians, and vehicle modes that are impacted. So you can see where the bang for the buck is. It was important as we're looking at all modes of transportation that we're providing a safe environment for all people to get to and from the school. So not everybody has the ability to walk or to bike, and some people are going to need to drive. And it's ensuring that all of them are addressed through the process. So these are some of the significant elements. Again, there's a number of partners that were involved. The schools have been very proactive in incorporating things like bike rodeos and other aspects of safe routes that really drive the education element. I think we've started to see some impact at the high school this year with a full bike cage as an impact as well. So the study has set the groundwork, I think, for the next steps in terms of implementing some of the projects and some of the additional work. There's been great strides now towards implementing those already as we have opportunities. So looking at what's next, we'd like to receive council input on the report that you have before you tonight, including the details involved there. We'd like to begin identifying priorities. Caution that we do have limited funding and staffing resources, so these are some of the things that we'll have to include as we're identifying priorities and how we deliver them into the next year, and how that balances with other expenditure needs that the town may have. And staff resources the town has to deliver the projects. We'll want to position the town for outside funding opportunities. So we'll talk a little bit later tonight about Measure B and opportunities there, and that might be an opportunity and other grant opportunities that come available. We've been successful, for instance, with County Health in getting grants through that organization. There may be future opportunities through some similar grants to fund some of these projects and these efforts as we move forward. And then ultimately, we'll incorporate the projects that we've identified or the work that we've identified into the capital improvement program. That will happen through the priority setting sessions that we do over the next several months into next year for implementation beginning in July of next year. So from a timing perspective, we're right in a sweet spot of being able to put the projects together and start to build the budget for next year. And with that, that'll conclude staff's report.
Thank you. A couple questions. Mainly this is on process. I look at the staff report, and the recommendation is to receive the report on traffic and parking around schools. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And any input that you have on projects or areas that you liked about the report or improvements you'd like to see. We look at this as we're calling it a final draft report. So the way that we're handling it is if there's significant things that we need to add on to it that aren't included, we would capture those in an appendix. If there are what we call fatal flaws to the report, we would obviously want to fix those. And then some of the small things we're tracking, so grammar, that kind of a thing where we need to correct those, we'll correct those in the final draft. So this is the opportunity. It's been on our website for some time. We've been receiving public input on the report. I'd like to round that out and get the report into a final version so that we can move forward with the rest of the process.
And then a couple of questions. First of all, yes, thank you. Good report. There's a general input. But has the staff or the consultants totaled up the cost of all of the suggestions and done any prioritization?
So I did run a total on the projects, and I believe the number was just over $7 million, and I had to break down, but I don't think I brought it with me. But we did not do prioritization. The prioritization is what we wanted to leave to the community and the council. Obviously, staff will start to do some providing of buckets and shifting priorities around a little bit, but we'll want the input from the public on what that looks like, and that will develop as we're doing the priority setting sessions. We'd like to add that over 80% of the projects that are identified are under $100,000. So there's a large number of projects that are very manageable in terms of small allocations that makes them really attainable and with easy access. I would also like to add that traffic patterns, our consultant Jaime Rodriguez is here as well. Spent a lot of time in Los Gatos over the end of the last school year and through the summer on this project and others, and has become very familiar and did a great job on this report. So my kudos to him for the hard work on this report.
And last question before I turn it over to someone else. Would the funding for any of these items be anticipated to come from our budget prioritization in January and then the budget that we adopt in May?
Yes, that would be the ideal way to fund these projects.
Ms. Jensen.
Thank you. First, to all of you that I see in the back row who worked so hard on this, from schools, bike committees, and transportation committees, and Safe Routes to School, thank you very much. It's a great report. My question was, I see what you want here, but since the action item is receive the report, I'm imagining that you don't want us to go through the many pages of suggestions and pick them out today, correct? By your smile, I'm thinking, no, you do not.
That is correct. If there are themes that resonated with you, we definitely want to hear that.
All right. So, for example, there was one suggestion with the high school that cost $0, which was, please ask Los Gatos Lodge to let us go through. So could the council say tonight, please Los Gatos Lodge, let high school students go through? Because that cost nothing. So that's an actual question. And then if you want feedback, there were a number of items that were about $2,500, $5,000, which struck me as easy. So to the extent that if you want input that says now, for those low-cost items, if we can get those implemented, that would be really helpful. And if you want input on what did I think was missing, we're going to discuss it later tonight. But obviously one of the ways that you encourage people to walk or ride to the high school is that you limit parking. And so I didn't see that as part of this report necessarily as a separate item. That's my input, and then my question is, I guess, my real question is, when do we expect that we're going to come back and do those things that are on your list and actually do the prioritization and talk through all of the suggestions that we have in the report?
So we're happy to take suggestions along the way between now and January as we're starting to formulate our priorities for the budget cycle. The real work for the council will come in that time frame from January through the adoption of the CIP and the middle part of the next calendar year. So that's really where the rubber hits the road in terms of getting projects identified and prioritized and fitting that within the dollars that are available at that particular time. So I think it's difficult it's easy to do themes now and identify areas that you liked. I think you've done a good job of providing us some guidance on some of the smaller ticket items and the $0 items that seem like no-brainers, and we can certainly take a look at those aggressively, and that's a good input for us. In terms of the next year, we'll want to start to prioritize some of the bigger items as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Since this report in some way or fashion will be coming back, we talked about prioritization, and I thought of it in terms of categorization. I'm going to start with what I call not our jurisdiction, which is the Montessorino around Dave's school. My feedback on that would be to encourage Montessorino to help with that and contribute financially. And then I would go into a category, what I call low-hanging fruit. And it's been set up here already, things that are zero cost, things that can be done now, things that have already been done, as was illustrated in your report. Thank you. That would be another bucket. And then I would say things that I would consider to be low-cost items, $50,000 or less, that could be another bucket. And as was mentioned, there are some items that are $2,500, $5,000, whatever. But maybe for the purposes of when we do our budgeting, we can group all the things that are $50,000 or less into a bucket. And then two other points. I was very impressed with the amount, the breadth of the report, and I realized that some items are expensive, and as you had mentioned, the totality would be $7 million. Items above $50,000 that are not in our jurisdiction, or that are in our jurisdiction, perhaps can be put into a group, and we could get a total for those items. And then the town could pursue grants and or issue some bonds or certificates of participation or something to that effect as possible funding solutions. We recently were looking at doing our own tax measure, but that did not move forward. So I was very excited when I saw this report and the possibilities to improve the quality of life for our residents. But of course, there is always that issue of money. And as you had mentioned, the $7 million is quite costly. But if we can, I don't know, again, format this or categorize this report when it comes back into those types of things, or a spreadsheet or something, that would be very helpful.
Ms. Sayak.
Thank you. Just to re-echo what everyone else has said, this has been a tremendous effort that I've been excited about when it was first allocated and now to actually have it. So thank you to all of those that have participated. I definitely, as has already said, those that we can start on immediately. I think this is a long time coming. So things that we may have discretionary funds for, I'd like to see how we can start moving on that. In February, after a priority setting, if at our mid-year, what I'd like to look at is how does this fit in with our upcoming bike and pedestrian plan? And when we begin priority setting in January, are there certain projects where you as a group can say this is our highest priority, so that when we start identifying things with our capital improvement plan, we could just start ticking off the list? And how do we do that equitably? So it's funds that impact the most, but it's not necessarily concentrated in one area. Those are the types of discussions I'd love to have. This has started that, but I'd love to have that more in-depth look at how we can really affect some of the traffic alleviation solutions that this is pointing to. I understand it's organic. What I'd love to also see is how we can incorporate this into any changes that we may be able to see if Measure B passes and we get, for example, if we get the traffic modeling bus that we get, how we can potentially augment this study with any work that we're doing there. I mean, this is a great start, and I'd love to just be able to continue this discussion whenever we start doing priorities. But definitely, if we can start anything now, I'd love to start that process sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I also think this is a very good, very exciting report, lots of good information. I'll say in the several hours that I spent reading it, I still don't have my arms all the way around it. And so the first thing that comes to my mind is, are these all good ideas? You know, I'm thinking filter, prioritize. And I couldn't do that by myself. The questions come to my mind are, what are the biggest areas? And, you know, I hear everybody saying, let's get started, but are all of these good ideas? I recall one in there where there was, I think, widening the bicycle lane at the expense of losing some pedestrian space, and so you nixed that. So there was one place where you said, well, this wasn't a good idea, but I don't know if all of these are good ideas. Even $25,000 might be too much to spend if it's not really a problem idea, not really a good idea. So I didn't get a feel for whether there'd been any filtering really, or any prioritization, or what are the biggest problems. I have another question, but do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, thank you for that, and that is a very important point. In that some of the proposals in here may be things that we don't want to take on. One of the ones that we'd want to have some discussion on, as an example, are speed tables along Shannon, and whether at the intersections near the park and the school, where the school traffic is, we want to do speed tables there, which would significantly slow traffic on the positive and on the negative. There are a significant impact on the vehicle side by potentially creating additional traffic issues in the area, to the advantage of providing greater access and awareness for people on foot and on bike. So those are the things that we'll want to have a discussion on before we actually implement them, as we bring them forward for discussion as projects as we're moving forward. And those are the things that will, as the prioritization comes along, those will fall down the list, or potentially some of them off of the list as the council decides that those aren't reasonable projects.
So my second question, and I'm not exactly sure how to put it in a question, but so my concern is, it's good. It's very focused on the LGUSD school district and safe routes to school, and I like the fact that Alta Vista was included, which is not part of that, but it doesn't include all of Los Gatos and all of the schools that people attend in Los Gatos. So on the west end of Los Gatos, is there money needed to improve routes to get to Westmont? I know that there's routes to Union Middle School from the other side of Union Avenue that have some concern. Lynn Avenue has no sidewalks but a lot of traffic. Are the crosswalks adequate on Union? So my concern would be, maybe the question is, do we want to spend all our money on this and not think about the other parts of town that are outside of the LGUSD school district.
Yeah, within the scope of the study, we were just unable to be exhaustive and to incorporate. You see the amount of work of detail that's involved with the number of schools that were analyzed here, and because of the amount of participation, I would say in Safe Routes to School and other efforts, we really tried to focus on where we thought the heaviest need was. Not to say that there isn't need elsewhere, but really where the biggest bang was right out of the gate. We fully acknowledge that there are other areas that we need to continue to explore. The downtown area with the Catholic school is another potential location that needs some additional work, and so there are a broad number of locations that have probably a smaller subset of projects that we'll need to address over the longer term.
Thank you.
Let me ask you what, going back to what everyone else has said, that this is a great report. Thank you. And thank you, everyone else. But what I would be looking for, because this is a lot of information, and you're saying, Council, we would hope that you could prioritize and those kinds of things. And I agree that has to be done. But it would be helpful for me, sort of touching upon what Mr. Rennie was saying, if, for example, you had a list of these are the things that have no cost, and these are the things that are $1,000 or less, and it keeps going up, because that could cause some easy decisions. Another metric that would be helpful for me in doing an analysis is that the action items are broken down into types. Now, that's sort of done here, but even simpler than it is. And then another thing I would be looking for is what are the funding sources? Again, you've touched upon that, but what are all of the funding sources? Is the high school going to contribute? I mean, I don't know. If they're here today, I'll ask them. But those kinds of things. So simplifying it so that this council can prioritize when it comes back to us in, let's say, January, and then make decisions between January and May.
That's great. Yeah, I think this is all a perfect input in what we're looking for in terms of solidifying the next steps. I don't think we were expecting you to prioritize everything for us tonight, certainly providing the input on the highlights that you see and where you see strengths and where you see holes that we may need to bolster are all good things that we'd want to incorporate.
Thank you. Ms. Sayak.
So, Mr. Morley, in terms of the process, I recall the community meetings and the various research items that Jaime was doing. So was there an opportunity for all the stakeholders to actually get together and just go through the report, the draft? And is there another opportunity for the group to have some of these discussions about priorities and basically trying to categorize them so that it's an easier table to look at when it comes to funding?
I think that's a great idea. We certainly have the opportunity to include our commissions and the Safe Routes to School Coalition in that discussion as we're headed towards the end of the calendar year, and we can rely on those groups to help do some prioritization if that aligns.
If just speaking for me personally, I think that type of venue might be more. It would be a better venue to have an actual discussion and hear whether the pros and cons of each action item that's suggested is actually reasonable. And inviting more people to the meeting, whether it's the council as well as the public, I think might be an opportunity to just have that informal conversation that we all want to have, but is kind of difficult to do in this format.
Sounds good, yep.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Morley. I do have, this is a public testimony. We do have public testimony. I do have folks that have given me a card. If you want to testify, please submit a card. First one, Thomas Cook.
Hi, good evening. I'm Thomas Cook, representing Safe Routes to School. I share what's been said. It was a great report, so thanks for allocating money. Thanks for managing it. and Jaime, good job. I also want to take this opportunity to share some news and express some additional thanks. As you know, Safe Routes School has been working for the last 10 years to reduce traffic congestion around schools by getting more students involved in active transportation like walking and biking, and when vehicles have to be used, carpooling or busing or drop-off spots away from school. We've been an informal community coalition made up of interested members of the community, students, parents, and leaders in the town and police department and schools and school districts. The news is we've just formed a new entity or augmented the coalition with a new entity that is a 501c3, a nonprofit dedicated to Safe Routes to School in town. Our leadership of the nonprofit or the board is comprised of members from the leadership team from the Safe Routes to School Coalition. Having a nonprofit entity strengthens the work we've been doing and helps ensure continuity going into the future, and it has the practical value actually of helping the town at times apply for grants when a Safe Routes School element is a weighted factor, and the nonprofit entity now can also be the recipient of Safe Routes School funds for the first time. So there's a number of things that you all are involved in and that are on the agenda today that are very relevant to our mission in Safe Routes School, including the traffic study, and which feeds into the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan, Measure B, the work that's being done at the high school to encourage more biking and walking. I'm sure there's some more. So I look forward to how all that plays out and continuing to work with this great community team in the future for the benefit of our students. And I wanted to thank, the most important thing is I wanted to thank the formation of the 501c3 was enabled by a memorandum of understanding between the town, Los Gatos Union School District, the high school, and Hillbrook School. So specifically, I wanted to thank the town council and town staff, especially Laurel Prevetti and Matt Morley for their support, and Diana Abadi, Los Gatos Union School District, and Karen Briones, the high school, Christy Grasty and Kevin Rogers, and Hillbrook School and Matt Silver. Did I just get nixed?
Thank you. Ms. Jensen.
Thank you. What's the name of the 501c3?
We stayed up all night. Los Gatos Montesareno Safe Routes School.
Okay. Is that, can we find it .org?
No.
Or does it, okay. How do we find it?
That's a good question. We don't have a website set up for the nonprofit yet.
Okay. Well, I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Seeing no other questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Karen Briones. And again, if you want to address us on this item, please submit a card.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Good evening. Honorable Mayor Spector, Vice Mayor, town council members, and town staff. I think most of you know I'm Karen Briones, and I'm the Safe Routes to School coordinator for the Los Gatos Union School District. I've lived in Los Gatos for the past 15 years with my husband and my 3 girls, and my girls have benefited from great schools, a caring community, and a safe environment. And this is what Los Gatos is known for, and Safe Routes to School represents the best of this aspect. It's a collaborative effort to bring active transportation to the community using the unique talents of the Los Gatos Police Department, Los Gatos High School, Hillbrook School, Los Gatos Union School District, and of course, the town of Los Gatos. That's just to name a few. As one of the major collaborators, I wanted to say thank you for your ongoing support of our programs and efforts. From the big things such as road improvements, green bike lanes, and the traffic study around schools, to the smaller things such as handing out walk and roll maps the first day of school, and support of our community education efforts and events to inform our parents. we've done much together. But in particular, I wanted to say thank you for the contribution to put pedometers into the hands or on the hips or the shoelaces or the backpacks of about 3,500 children in our public and private schools here in Los Gatos. The Where Will Your Feet Take You campaign has helped to encourage children and families to include active transportation as a way to add activity to their day and build lifelong healthy habits. So a little update. We've collected over 3.4 million steps on our way to Washington, D.C. Last week alone, we bypassed quite a few states and are now in Valentine, Nebraska. So here's our map. This is where we are, and that's where we're trying to get to. And I'm very confident that we will collect enough steps to get there by Election Day. It's the support of these programs and all the efforts that make Safe Routes to School happen here in Los Gatos, and I'm looking forward to continuing our work together on the big things and the small things to get Los Gatos moving, build healthy habits, and care and cultivate a caring community. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, I was going to ask you how far you were, and you answered it before I asked you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Again, if you want to address us, please submit a card. Emilito. Maybe it's a team.
To the Honorable Mayor Spector, Vice Mayor Sayek, council members, town staff, and Los Gatos citizens. My name is Emmy Eto, and I am one of the trustees of the Los Gatos Union School District. And I am also one of the 2 trustees liaisons to the town. 3 years ago, our school district, the town council, and the Silicon Valley Leadership Group worked together with the VTA on the and then proposed VTA bond measure, what we now know as Measure B. Measure B proposes a 1/4% sales tax to mitigate traffic congestion, improve roads, and increase public transportation, and educate students in Santa Clara County. In participation in this, we have been working together on the Los Gatos Montesino Safe Routes to School program. If you recall, last December, Safe Routes to School received the California School Board's Honorable Mention Award for its program in collaboration with the town and the community partners. We also want to thank the town for joining our district, the high school district in Hillbrook, by contributing $5,000 for the creation of a 501c3 called the Los Gatos Montesino Safe Routes to School Corporation, to ensure the sustainability of the future programs that strive to provide a safer environment for all who walk and bike in the community. At the same time, the Los Gatos Union School District appointed Karen Briones as our own Safe Route to School coordinator to create educational programs for our students. Our joint effort this past fall to kick off Where Will Your Feet Take You created an excitement with our students and their families as students track their steps with their pedometers. Given the above, we look forward to continuing our relationship with the Town Council to help minimize traffic in Los Gatos and enhance safe routes to school for our kids if Measure B passes on November 8th. Thank you.
Questions? See none. Thank you very much. I have no other cards. Seeing no one coming forward, I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing and look to the council. It looks like we're asked to receive the report, but do we have any discussion, direction? Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I think, as I said before, I couldn't get my arm all the way around this. I'd have to read it 3 or 4 more times to really come up with priorities. But 2 things jumped out at me, so I wanted to just share those. On page 43, they talk about the lodge, and I highlighted some words here that strongly agree with. I've had this idea for a while. It says identify in as, well, not exactly this idea, but the gist of it. Identify in as many town planning documents as possible that public access through the Los Gatos Lodge site to the Los Gatos High School is a priority for the town, will place any future developer in the position of needing to be responsive to these policy statements. So I feel strongly that that's a really good idea. And the other one that stuck out to me was the movement, and again, I don't know what the biggest problems are, but I think that Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard is a big area, so I liked the movement of that crosswalk. It's $750,000, so it's expensive, but it seemed like it, I think there was removal of those pork chop islands, and I think it would make it more efficient crossing in a very busy area. So just my comments those are the two that really jumped out at me. And if I could just then end with a question. I saw in here a lot of places where they're talking about getting rid of pork chop islands. Is that kind of a pork chop islands are passé now, or we just don't like pork, there's better ideas, or...
I think I'll let Jaime Rodriguez address that for us. He's a traffic engineer and has great expertise in that area.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, the removal of pork chop islands at areas where there is high pedestrian generation through programs like Safe Routes to School or just in general shopping centers, they're usually a good idea, but usually you need to do some type of a traffic study to make sure that there isn't going to be any significant impact by doing the change. And a lot of the recommendations you've seen in the report are concept plan lines to give you a vision of what a street could be, but that supplemental environmental assessment to make sure that those improvements are feasible, or to your point earlier, they're the right thing to do. Those things have to happen still.
So if I could just follow up, so as I thought this through, I think this is more just curious out of anything, but as I thought this through, pork chop islands seemed like they were probably a good idea when you have some pedestrians but not too many, because now it gets them closer so they don't have as far to get across the street. Sure. The turning traffic is not an issue. You can get across when there isn't somebody turning and be ready. The problem is when you have too many to fit on the island. Is that the problem?
That's pretty much it, and that happens a lot at Shannon. I think, was that the intersection you mentioned?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the students spill over, from the pork chop island into the street, and so it really stood out to us during all of our field observations as one of the reasons why we made the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Sayak.
So I want to use the Shannon example and just how we can utilize this document for future development. So we know, well, we don't know, but we're assuming that a development will occur on the corner of Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard. Now that we have a document that looks at proposed changes that would enhance safety for our students, is there now an ability to have a nexus so when that project moves forward, we can ask for these improvements to be included?
There is, and we do look for every opportunity. Having these projects will help us with identifying where the need is and incorporating those in the conditions with the projects.
So what would be helpful, and one more thing, when we're looking at the document as a totality, is then projects such as these, where we know there could be future funding, leave a set aside so that where are areas where the town could fill in the gaps. If we can start looking at how certain projects could get funded, whether it's through Measure B, through upcoming developments, through grants, and then give us a list of, well, these are areas that are still of importance, but realistically, it's the town that's going to need to carry the burden. I think those types of discussions of financial resources would be helpful for me to help prioritize where to start allocating money next year.
Thank you.
I actually had the Boulevard Shannon on my list here, in the sense of the first question was, could those improvements be included in a development? Second question is, are developers advised as they're beginning our town process of this potential improvement/expenditure?
They are, and the more that we have the documents behind them, the easier it is for us to identify what those needs are. Typically, the developers are informed as they bring their proposals forward, and we start to identify what kind of development it is. That drives a little bit of what the projects are.
All right. Again, questions or a motion, Ms. Jensen.
My question was, do you want a motion? We want a motion? Okay. So my motion is that the council receive the report and thank everyone who's been a part of it. That what I heard is that we would like to the extent possible where things cost nothing, where they've been achieved, to do that sooner rather than later. The Los Gatos Lodge was mentioned a couple of times. We'd like to look at categorization of costs, and these were categorized by what was called by Mr. Leonardis low-hanging fruit, or those items that are about $2,500, $10,000 that we might be able to get done right away. We'd also like to categorize the projects by the greatest impact. So how could we get the most bang for whatever buck that we do spend? That we use our town committees and commissions and Safe Routes to School in order to have meetings to set priorities where these things should be taking place sooner rather than later, and hopefully get our students involved. And that to the extent that we can identify funding sources, whether that be a development project with a nexus, whether that be a grant funding, or whether that be Measure B, that we be looking for that early and often so that we can get that back to the council and then start implementing these ideas.
Thank you. Second, discussion.
I'll be supporting it. One thing I would like, and it is that we make sure that as our bicycle pedestrian plan is finalized, that there is a connection between the two reports. So,
and absolutely would include that in the motion.
Seconder would also. Mr. Rennie.
So just a comment, it doesn't need to be in the motion, but I didn't hear anything about filtering. I'm assuming staff, when they're making these lists, would probably make recommendations that certain things are, even if they're cheap, maybe not worth doing.
We would absolutely do that along the way.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody involved. I'm sorry? If you haven't noticed, this was generically referred to by Ms. Pravetti and me as our transportation agenda. We are on agenda item 8, Whitney Avenue residential permit parking and residential parking options. Staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. J.R. Langer, Los Gatos Montesino Police Department, Lieutenant of Support Services. Tonight I'm here to present a staff report documenting a petition by the Whitney Avenue neighborhood for preferential parking. I will also be addressing plans for future requests and seeking Council's recommendations for processing and managing these requests. As the report indicates, the Police Department received 3 petitions for preferential parking in August of 2015. Council addressed the Alpine Avenue petition in March of 2016, initiating a 6-month pilot program. During this process, Council suggested staff to consider future petitions holistically in an attempt to reduce unintended parking impacts created by modified or preferential parking areas. I'll cover this recommendation later in this verbal report. When considering the Whitney Avenue petition, staff conducted analysis of current parking and walking options, specifically addressing parking impacts associated with off-campus student parking. Research indicated that the Whitney Avenue neighborhood was experiencing severe parking impacts. The petition met the requirements of the neighborhood parking plan process and was brought before the Transportation and Parking Commission on August 10th. The Transportation and Parking Commission agreed with staff's recommendation to support a pilot program similar to the Alpine Avenue pilot to explore making preferential parking a fully cost recoverable program and continue research into potential impacts caused by modified parking areas. Staff recommends implementation of the pilot project, including ongoing data collection in regards to the Whitney Avenue parking modifications. Implementation of the permit parking is resource intensive, requiring significant public outreach and community meetings to determine if there is a neighborhood desire for the program. In reviewing the opportunity to address the situation holistically, staff made several observations. The primary observation, based on staff experience with the process, is that building a consensus among neighbors who have not yet felt an impact will be difficult and potentially unsuccessful in the short term. Due to budget constraints, if a holistic approach is desired, staff recommends council identify this as a priority for fiscal year 17-18 at an upcoming priority setting session. This priority would address both the venue or the revenue from the program and the staffing levels necessary to adequately advance the program, the goal of being fully cost recoverable. The Johnson Avenue, Crossway, and Alpine Avenue parking petitions were implemented without consideration of full cost recovery. Prior to processing Laurel Muse or future petitions, staff will be considering fee changes in March associated with the neighborhood parking plan process to allow for fiscal cost recovery. If approved, the new fees would go into effect July 1st. And that's the conclusion of my verbal report, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you. Let me follow up on the cost recovery statements you were making. We have as a recommendation here a 6-month pilot preferential parking program. Would we need to, if we do that, would we need to say, and we want cost recovery, or is that included?
It's a good question. Right now, I think we're looking at cost recovery for any future petitions that come forth, and then also looking at raising fees to make the current programs also cost recoverable.
And that was my second question. These permits, one pays for them every year, and so when you get your bill for the permits, you were saying that there were some neighborhoods where it wasn't cost recovery, but the town could pick that up at the next billing cycle, correct?
Yeah, so maybe a little history might help some perspective. When the parking plan originally was implemented, most of the preferential or residential neighborhood parking plans were near the downtown area, and they did experience a heavy load of people that did not live in the areas parking there and receiving citations. That citation revenue, coupled with the annual permit fees, paid to pay for the salary and the processing of those annual permits and the citation review to an adequate level. When we began to extend the preferential parking areas in the Los Gatos High School area, what happened was those areas, once they receive some type of modified parking, really don't receive enough citation revenue to offset the enforcement revenue and the processing fees that it takes to run that program.
But couldn't and that's a good distinction. I hadn't thought that through. But couldn't the shortfall be made up in the cost of the annual permit fees?
It could.
Ms. Jensen.
I have a couple questions. Follow up on that line of questioning. Has anyone figured out what it would cost if you raised the price of the permit to make it cost recovery?
Yes and no. Initially, in gathering data for this project, I did some initial, I guess you would call, comparisons to what both Alpine and Whitney would cost us and how much we would be behind the curve, basically, to be full cost recoverable for those two. As far as the only thing that is the unknown is, while we can assume what the revenue will be from permit fees based on the number of permits we get, that is a fluid number. And so we would never really know exactly. We could approximate, but we wouldn't really know. Currently, people that are living in the preferential parking areas, we're getting between a 50 and 65% average of the residents there actually purchasing permits, where the other residents don't. And so if I knew an exact number that we would have every year, I could say, yes, we could make the permit fees this much to cover the program.
Two more. Given that the streets we're talking about are public streets, and one should be able to park on a public street, and that we're now creating permit zones where you can't park on a public street, there has to be some reason to do that. So my question is, well, have you figured out, we don't have the results back from Alpine Avenue yet, so I'm a little bit concerned that we're not knowing what the result of that pilot is if we implement another one. That's just a concern. But the thing is, do we know if we're creating a domino effect? So we put permit parking here and everybody parks here, put permit parking here, everybody parks here, and pretty soon we have an entire town of permit parking, even though they're public streets. That doesn't make sense to me. So that's the first part of my question. The second part of my question is, do we know, and this could be for Mr. Morley or someone else, whether or not the permit parking, for example, on Alpine has actually discouraged people from driving to the high school? Because I could see that being a benefit, because it would be a traffic improvement. So a two-part question.
Okay. Your concerns mirror mine. In fact, to the number of requests that we are receiving for preferential parking. And so we do have a concern with that, and we have spoken during our meetings of whether the process does need to be amended to address making some type of qualifications for people to actually receive preferential parking in residential neighborhoods. As far as Alpine Avenue, it has been a success as far as reducing the amount of people parking there or the amount of off-campus high school parking. The street, all the reports we've received from the community in that area are positive, other than some speeding concerns now because the street is wider and people go faster on wider streets. And as far as...
I'll help you with it.
Okay.
So the second part was the Alpine Avenue. I understand that it's reducing the problem for Alpine Avenue. However, is it creating a problem for streets around there? And do you know whether or not it's acted as a deterrent for students driving their cars to school since they can't park there anymore?
Thanks for the help. So yes, both Alpine Avenue, Johnson, and Cross Avenues did have impacts on their surrounding areas. When Johnson and Cross Avenue and the extension of Los Gatos Boulevard did go into effect, that's when Alpine Avenue primarily felt their huge increase in student parking because the students were moved from Cross and Alpine, or Cross and Johnson. When Alpine went into effect, it again moved the students parking in that location over to Whitney and Stacia and Wheeler and Los Gatos Boulevard. So in light of that, we did attach a map that Parks and Public Works did help create, that we came up with a distance that we thought would deter kids from parking in, and that they would be willing to walk at a certain distance, and we increased the amount of area just a little bit to extend the modified parking area we had at one time. And so what we suggest in the report is that we wait to see what happens with Whitney Avenue. As we've been discussing tonight, there has been some type of change in the students' behavior with driving to school this year, beginning of the year. It seems like there are less kids driving at this time, which is something that we kind of expect anyways, though. Generally, as kids get older throughout the year, more kids get their licenses. End of the school year or middle to end of the school year, more kids are driving again. And so we do expect the impacts to increase again towards middle to end of school year.
And my final question actually has to do with the map. And my question is that depicting existing conditions, or is it depicting something you are suggesting? Because I noticed that the map indicates that there's residential permit parking on Bella Vista. There is not. I live there. I know there's no residential parking there. So is that something you're recommending, or is it something that you think is existing? Because if you think it's existing, it's incorrect.
I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe there is some residential parking on the east side of Bella Vista Avenue going up.
It's olive zone. I actually looked at it on my way driving to. So is that what you mean by parking restriction?
Yes.
Okay, you don't mean permit parking.
No, that area
is
olive zone.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rennie.
If I could just follow up a little bit on the change of student behavior. So in your report, you said increased usage of the high school bicycle cage and reported increased number of teens at the library may indicate fewer vehicles requiring parking accommodations. And then you just gave this idea that, well, we're early in the year. So is this increase to last spring, or is it increased to this time last year, the increase in bicycle cage and library usage?
I would say both. I think the phenomenon that we've had and the success that we've had with safe routes to school, with the kids that have been in the younger grades that have been coming up through those grades and are now attending Los Gatos High School, has probably changed the way that they're going to get to school a little bit. But like I said, and also the increased number of bike racks at the high school also is an indicator that more kids are biking to school, and I think that will just continue to happen. But I do foresee the fact that throughout the year we will see an increase in kids also driving their cars to school.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions of staff? Ms. Sayak.
Mr. Langer, it just occurred to me, I don't know if you have the information. One of the things that I recall the high school discussing last year was by changing their first bell later, there are more students that could use the bus, the VTA bus. Do you know if, I'm looking at someone, do you know if that's actually correct, and do you know if that actually has been used so that more students are using the bus?
I don't have that information.
Okay.
Mr. Rennie.
Maybe I just want to comment on that, because last time I was at a VTA meeting, I asked them, or I suggested that they time their buses for our school. So it doesn't seem like we need to change the bell. We need to make sure VTA understands what time they should run the bus, because they seemed like they were willing to time it for what we needed.
I don't see any other questions at this point. I don't have any cards. Does anyone wish to address us on this item? Seeing no one coming forward, I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing and look to the council for a motion. Ms. Jensen.
Okay. It strikes me that this might be premature, given that we don't have the full and complete results of Alpine, that we know, based upon what Mr. Langer has said, that there is a domino effect. If we basically close off one neighborhood, we put it to another neighborhood. That's not to say that I don't recognize what the problem is in the neighborhoods that are getting impacted, because I live very near the high school. However, if we don't know how to make it cost recovery, and we assume that that's a difficulty, and you're identifying staff problems, I wonder if it makes sense to wait until our January budget prioritization to that, and that point we'll have hopefully more data from Alpine Avenue. We'll know, hopefully from the staff, what it would cost for cost recovery, so that we don't undertake a 6-month project without knowing that it's going to cost something, given our obligations that are coming up and what we want to do, what we just discussed with the other report. So I would hope that we could defer consideration of this until our January budget discussion, or at least until the Alpine Avenue report is complete and back for us from staff, before we actually take action. So that would be my motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Leonardis.
I will second that motion.
Questions relating to the motion. When will Alpine be completed, the study?
The pilot's scheduled to be completed into December.
That's good timing. And then when would your analysis of cost recovery be completed?
I would say it's going to depend on staff's ability to devote resources to do that. To be exact, we'd probably need some help from finance to get some exact numbers. We could probably have approximations by fiscal 17-18 discussions.
I think what we'll try and do, given the interest in the cost recovery, is do our best with order of magnitude for different components of the preferential parking, because there's a lot of upfront costs going through the process even to get to this point. And then there's the implementation costs, which is what the lieutenant was sharing with you. So I think we would want to look at the full components of the entire program and come back with some options for priority setting.
So you're talking about January.
Yes.
Ms. Sayak.
Okay, so I'm stuck on this one. So I'm looking at the staff report, and it says that right now you've received 2 written requests for preferential parking, Cherrystone Drive and Laurel Mews. Have you gotten any indications from areas closer to the high school of parking problems? Do you anticipate any other areas? Let me rephrase that. If Whitney were to go forward, we can assume it would just transfer the problem, but have you had communication with any other streets or neighborhoods outside of Whitney that are close to the high school that you feel would carry that burden?
We've had some initial discussions with some of the residents on Statia and also some of the residents on Loma Alta.
Okay.
And if I could just clarify a little bit regarding the costs, in like the town manager stated, the majority of the costs are staff resources developed or pointed at doing the research, the data gathering, the outreach to the community. And so the resources already expended on Whitney, the greatest part of that has already transpired right now. There will still be an associated cost ongoing, but it's significantly less.
Well, let me follow up on that. When staff talks about cost recovery for permit parking, are they talking about cost recovery for the ongoing, the permits, or are they talking about cost recovery for the foundational study that leads to the cost to the permits? And, well, let's just stop it at that.
It's really both, and I think up until this time, the department, both departments, because there is also involvement of Parks and Public Works, both departments have absorbed those costs. And I think we're getting to the point, particularly now looking at the enforcement side, where it's just not sustainable. And so that's why we're thinking, if we're just pushing the problem around by adding more streets, we either need to really do a more comprehensive study and figure out a way to pay for it, or we need a different policy statement with respect to preferential parking. For example, do we want to do this for quality of life impacts, or do you want a more defined safety issue or something along those lines? Because the open-endedness of our current program is leading us to find that we really cannot continue to absorb this. And I think in our culture of wanting to be very customer-oriented and help our neighborhoods, we tend to say yes a lot, and we're getting to the point where we may not be able to say yes without making sure the council understands the full budget implications of that yes.
Ms. Jensen.
Okay, so having made the motion and now understanding that the majority of the cost for Whitney Avenue has already been expended, then my question is a matter of fairness. If they followed the procedure and we've already spent the money, then I may consider withdrawing my motion if, in fact, they've done everything that they're supposed to do and the cost recovery opportunity is not there because it's already been spent. And is that correct? Is that what's happened?
Yes.
Okay, in that case, I would like to withdraw my motion because they've gone through what they're supposed to do and we've already spent the money.
All right. Will the seconder of the motion, Mr. Leonardis, want to pick up the motion?
I would like to, for the very reason, as stated earlier, I'm interested in the results of the Alpine Avenue study. I think when we passed that pilot program, we were looking at one thing in particular, and that was the safety of that street. That was a narrow street, and having cars parked on both sides, in effect, made it one lane. and cars had to stop and separate, and it was just a disaster in the morning. I know because I go down it quite frequently, or did at the time. And on this particular situation, I don't have any information about it other than it's a wish for the neighborhood. I understand that if we continue to do this as the town manager had said, we can't be all things to all people, and that includes things such as I may or may not want people parking in front of my house during school hours, but the reality is it could push the problem into other neighborhoods, and then we're going to have to continue. Pretty soon kids will be parking at Lee High School to go to Los Gatos High School. And I'm very concerned about that other than for safety reasons. So I think we need to put some more specifics in place. If it is a real safety issue, we need to consider it. But if it's just, I don't like people parking in front of my house and I happen to live close to the high school, that was kind of a pre-existing condition when you had bought your home. So I want to be very careful. I do want to honor the requests if the citizens go through the process. I do understand that. But I guess what I'm saying is I would like to get more information at this time. So I will pick up the motion.
All right, I'm gonna follow up on that. The motion that you would be picking up would be that we would not be doing the preferential parking program for Alpine at this point. We would be waiting in part for the for Whitney. We would be waiting in part for the December 2016 Alpine information. However, the original motion also spoke to cost recovery. And now we have learned that there are two components of cost recovery, one having already been expended. So, and the other would be coming forward with the permits. So I'm going to go back to the maker of the motion, and if you could just verbalize for us what your motion is.
Everything that you just stated, I would like this to come back in January when we have the results of the Alpine study, as well as more information on the cost recovery. I do understand that there were monies already spent. How much money is, I do not know. I don't have that information tonight. I'm not sure if staff has that information, but there will be additional information about cost recovery in January, and that will also be a time when we have more information about our budget. Is that correct? So I am looking forward to that. Again, we have to be egalitarian to all streets and all communities in Los Gatos. If it is a legitimate safety hazard, such as Alpine was, that's great. But we are getting to a point where we have to really look at things like our budget. We can't possibly put speed bumps on every single street or restricted parking on every single street in Los Gatos. And another thing that was mentioned by Mr. Langer was the enforcement or the town manager, I can't remember which, but it becomes just difficult to enforce, so what are we really achieving? So I would like to get more information, at least on the cost recovery, to see if we are going to be continuing down this route, and I know we have 4 other council members up here who will be deciding this in the future, but we have information about what is the actual cost to the town.
We have a motion. We have a second.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Who was the seconder of the new motion?
There is no seconder. I said,
Okay.
Do we have a second?
Thank you.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I would like to have a little more discussion and another question or two for Lieutenant Langer. So you did a good job of starting to look at this holistically, and there is a limit to how many more streets students could get pushed to. And I've been thinking about this problem, and what's the progression? What's the end game? In your report, you talk about, well, let's use Balzer Field. Well, how do we get students to walk from that distance? I think it's a reasonable distance to walk, but it's a little inconvenient. If we make enough streets non-parking, then Balzer Field soon becomes the closest place. They don't have to go to Lehigh to park and walk. So I guess my question is that there's two parts to it. Have you thought about how many streets do we really have to close down, and not just get them to park at Balzer, but to maybe stop driving, and when do we start getting a change in behavior, which I think is really what we want to get to, and can we use these parking limitations as tools to help change the behavior? So have you thought about that, and how many streets do you think we really need to close before we can get behavior change? Or if we closed one more with Whitney, would we start to get more behavior change? Lots of questions in there, I guess.
I'll do my best. So when we conducted our research, I think we basically looked at this and where is parking available for those kids, and so that's how we got our distance. I don't think that if we fail to do a blanket approach sometime down the road, if there is still an impact associated with Whitney, the kids will just find that the streets that are unrestricted and they will park there.
But there was a limited number of them. I think you've got about 6 or 8 on the list.
So what we looked at is we looked at Wheeler, Statia, Loma Alta, Upper Johnson, because portions of Johnson are already restricted, but it's in our estimation that the upper part of Johnson will be impacted, and the rest of Bella Vista. And so basically what we're looking at is about approximately 175 to 150, 175 residences that we will be putting restrictions on. That is about a 33% increase in the amount of extra enforcement area, coupled with another 10% from Alpine, Johnson, and Cross. And so it's about a 43 to 48% increase in parking enforcement areas and in areas that we're restricting traffic or parking.
So if I could just follow up, so you've kind of highlighted the cost part of it. What if I gave you the money? Do you think we could change behaviors? Or how many of those streets do we need to close to change behavior?
I think to effectively change behavior, we'd have to close them all. I really do. It's not something that I think is maybe the best thing to do, because then it restricts parking to all that areas. And I am very sympathetic to the fact that these are public streets, and then now we're restricting them during parts of the times. But when our parking program was implemented in 2001, one of the major premises that program was implemented on was quality of life issues, that people in their residences had the right to be able to park in front of their house and have friends come over and park in front of their house. And so while I am sympathetic to the fact that they are public streets, I do understand that portion of it as well, and I'm sympathetic to that portion as well. And so if we want to make those areas unimpacted from student parking, I think if we don't restrict them all, realistically, the kids will find the areas that are not restricted, and they'll park there, and they'll impact those small areas.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Jensen.
I'm going to try a different motion, and it's going to be 2 parts. The first part is that we accept the staff recommendation for the pilot program on Whitney, and that is just because it's a matter of fairness. They've gone through the existing process. The staff has spent the money. We've done the data. They've done the voting. So it strikes me that it would be unfair to say no at this point. The second part is, as the staff recommends, to look at what we're going to do in the future for other similar permits. And so my motion on that is that the staff come back to us with the results of the Alpine Avenue pilot parking, that we get information on cost recovery, both how much it costs up front to go through a study and a permit process under our existing policy, and what it would cost for enforcement ongoing, and how we could recover that. And as part of that question, I'd like to know, if we increase the cost of the permit, should that be increased townwide, or should that be increased in certain areas? Strikes me it should be fair across the board. Everybody pays the permit. You get a permit, you pay the same price. But I could see some controversy arising from that. And that we get some data, if we can, from the high school as to whether or not the lack of parking in residential areas affects whether they go to school. I suspect that, there's high school students out here, but I suspect that if you close the high school campus, not a lot of people would want to drive because you can't go anywhere at noontime, which is when it's fun to go somewhere. So it's kind of interesting questions, but so I would like to get that data back, and if we would be, and the third part finally is, to the extent that the permit parking needs to be looked at differently and have perhaps different criteria, safety versus quality of life. I'm not sure if that comes back to the policy committee. Is that a policy? If so, then I would move that it go to the policy committee for examination, and that the cost recovery portion of it come back to the council in time for us to make decisions on our budgeting in January.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Rennie.
I think I'm going to second it. I'm particularly attracted to the fairness idea of it, but also I think in different words, we need to think about it again more holistically. What are we doing next, right? If we're going to go to the next street, and then the next street, we just need to either plan to do all the streets we just talked about, or don't do any more streets, or find some other way to change behavior. But just doing one street and then the next street and the next street doesn't make sense. And I think that's what Ms. Jensen's getting at, is in all the analysis she was requesting. So I'm going to second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I'm going to support the motion, but I also want to look not only at the benefits that the neighbors are looking for and the cost of that, but also at the high school. And I have spoken with high school representatives many times, and in fact spoke just this year with high school administrators and actually discussed the Miles Avenue parking lot and was told that that was too far, that high school students do not want to and won't walk from the Miles Avenue parking lot to the high school. And quite frankly, that kind of response does frustrate me. It also frustrates me when there is not enough parking provided on the high school campus. So I understand yes, these are public streets, and we can't bar people from parking on those streets. But on the other hand, I do see issues related to not wanting to put oneself out. Ms. Sayak.
So I'll go ahead and support the motion for the various reasons that have been said. What I would like, and I don't know who to direct this to, we often talk about Palo Alto High School and Gunn High School as a model of how they get their students to not use cars there. And I'd be interested to know, because those schools, if I remember correctly, are surrounded by residences also, if they also have preferential parking in those residential streets and what distance they actually go out to if they do have it. I think that would be a helpful, it would just be one more data point for me. I would also, I support the cost recovery. I support the fairness. What I'd also love to hear from the Safe Routes to School, particularly from the high school administration, is what other metrics they are able to use so that we can tell whether limiting parking is actually getting more people out of cars. Because I think that's the correlation we're all looking for, instead of just pushing parking to other neighborhoods. So those are the two specifics I'd be looking for when this comes back.
Mr. Leonardis, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I do want to avoid, obviously, I am going to support the motion, but I do want to avoid the concept of you put your finger in the leak and then another leak springs. Or if you restrict parking in this neighborhood, it's just going to continue to creep further up the hill, because there are a finite amount of parking places, and we know that the school population continues to swell. And quite honestly, there's a certain amount of students that have to drive. If you live up in my neighborhood, what else can you do? There's no busing system. You live on a 45-degree angle straight down a hill. It's not safe for a bike. There's no sidewalks. So I have to sympathize with the realities at hand, that a certain amount of students are going to drive. I do realize that a lot of them like to drive and go out at lunch and those kinds of things. But essentially, as the town looks at this issue that has been around for a long time and the population continues to swell, it becomes our cost to continue to fight this problem, to keep the quality of life or to keep the neighbors happy. I don't want it to be disrupting of the learning environment at the school, kids getting chased out of neighborhoods, kids getting chased further up the hill, kids being told you have to park way over here and, by the way, walk in the rain for 10 minutes or 15 minutes to get to your class. It's detrimental, in my opinion. It would be nice if the high school would do something such as increase their parking with a garage or something, because it's probably been inadequate for years, as we know. I know that we want to discourage driving. I get it. But again, a certain amount of the population will always drive. And again, I look at this issue long term as the more that we restrict the immediate streets, it pushes the problem further up the hill.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I just want to make one observation. Looking at the map up there, and I'm frustrated also when you got messages that students don't want to walk from Balzer Field. I know that if you look at the top, just out off the top of the map is where the Los Gatos Lodge is, or right up at the top. And students were, when that gate was open, were parking there and walking through. That's why they closed the gate, because so many students started filling up all the parking lot at the lodge, and there wasn't any place for the visitors to the lodge to park. Well, if you look, that's a further distance than walking from Balzer Field, it looks like to me. So I'm not sure I believe the distance argument. Maybe it feels closer because you're immediately in the school grounds, but you still got a long ways to go to get to the buildings. So I don't know, maybe there's some other way to make it feel more like they're going to school. I don't know.
Further discussion? Hearing none. We have a motion. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item 9. Receive a report on regional transportation funding efforts and potential projects.
Thank you very much. Just a brief report for you on this particular item. On the screen and in your memo for this report is a list of project categories or buckets and the funding amount allocated through Measure B. Measure B being the sales tax initiative that's set for the November 8th ballot. This is the allocation that the VTA board approved, should that measure pass. And I wanted to go through them quickly just to highlight where the dollars are and what the buckets are. And I'll skip quickly through those that aren't very applicable to us in Los Gatos. So the first one is BART Phase 2, bringing BART to Santa Clara. The second one is a bicycle and pedestrian program for totaling $250 million. This will be a competitive program, so there are projects that the town submitted with our Envision list that will feed into or be eligible for this bucket of money. And there are potential projects that Los Gatos will receive out of this as the money comes to fruition, and there are allocations. The two Caltrain items, Caltrain corridor capacity and grade separations, are all meant to enhance rail service along the Caltrain lines. The county expressways will benefit the town indirectly, as those that commute out of Los Gatos are using those expressways, and there are specific projects that will go into that bucket. The need is certainly outweighs the funding there. Highway interchanges I want to talk about in a little bit more depth. It does affect or impact Los Gatos, but I'll cover that one at the end. Local streets and roads is essentially street maintenance to a total of about $7 million to Los Gatos over the course, or $500,000 a year over the course of the 30 years of the allocation. So that would, and that's formulaic, so that's a guaranteed amount of money that's coming our direction. On this particular item, the local streets and roads, there is a caveat that was approved by the board that says there's a little more discretion on how those dollars are used if the PCI is above a 70. So that gives a target. We're not there today. We're at a 67 today. So there's some work to be done if we want to have that latitude or that discretion. But we'll have 30 years to get there. The State Route 85 corridor is still in play and in progress. There may be some modifications to 85, and the separate advisory committee to the board is working on that. And Councilmember Jensen may be able to provide additional information on discussions there. Transit operations is bus service, and it talks about the addition of dollars to bus services. Certainly will play into what VTA does with their bus services and their current study on whether they change their focus to being more demand-based or fare recovery-based. And then jumping back up to the highway section, the interesting one for us, this is an area where the mayor and I negotiated quite a bit with VTA to get some inclusionary projects here that are very specific to Los Gatos, and the council received some updates on this along the way. But I wanted to go through them because they are so impactful, and I think the negotiations were really fruitful in bringing some things to us. So I've broken out into a couple slides with just some bullet points to cover them. So upgrade the Highway 17 and 9 interchange was on the list initially. It's there because it's a Caltrans priority. But it makes sense because I think we know that interchange could use some work, especially if we're looking at pedestrian and bicycle safety and mobility. And then we get into some of the asks that the mayor brought forward, deploying advanced transportation technology to reduce cut-through traffic. So that's a pretty broad framework to allow us to address some cut-through traffic, including signal control system upgrades, so traffic signal upgrades, travel information systems, and ramp metering. So this is all targeted towards improving traffic flow in the town, especially around cut-through traffic. And that can be, we think of beach cut-through traffic on the weekends, but we're seeing cut-through traffic now on Highway 9 in the mornings. That's fairly impactful to the town as well. There's in the same section, support multimodal congestion relief solutions. So this is where we talk about express bus services, local bus system improvements, including the traffic modeling to be able to provide school busing and to provide on-demand busing in the town through commercial areas to better service the town with multimodal transportation. And then the final one is to develop park and ride lots. So this is the idea of further maturing the Vasona light rail station in the interim until that light rail station develops. So the idea is that actually bringing light rail to Vasona is a longer term project, but the VTA has already allocated dollars through Measure A, the previous initiative to do property acquisition and to begin development of that property. So this will allow further expenditure of funds to make that actually occur. So that's a brief summary of what's included. You can see, especially in the highways area, the allocation was for $50 million, so a fair chunk of dollars that was originally allocated to widening of 17. The council asked that come off of the list, and the VTA was able to comply, and 10 million of that 50 was the Highway 9 interchange, so that 10 remains. The balance of the 40 is essentially allocated towards the projects that we saw there. Sort of the next steps looks like the biggie obviously is November 8th, and what happens then in terms of passage, the Measure B does need a 2/3 approval. With the passage, assuming that happens, funds flow to VTA beginning in April of 2017, so the sales tax increase would occur January 1st, and after the first quarter they would get their first allocation. We can be assured that there'll be a few other people besides the town of Los Gatos in line with open hands at that point. So we'll want to be prepared to have a prioritization of projects and to position ourselves for early funding allocations. Some of the projects, for instance, the busing has an ongoing operating cost associated with it. So if we wanted to be able to fund that over the life of the bond measure, the 30 years of the sales tax initiative, we'd want to have a plan in there early so that we can take advantage of that. That concludes the staff report.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Ms. Sayak.
So, Mr. Morrell, I just wanted to follow up on your last statement of the busing, and if we wanted to, basically, we want to capitalize on having a project ready to go, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Correct.
So, do you have some ideas on what we need to do between, I mean, I'm being presumptive and hopeful that this will pass, but are there steps that we can start to undertake now to be ready so that in April, when they are looking at allocating funds, we will have what VTA will be looking for?
Absolutely, and I think we're coming up close on November 8th, so we won't be able probably to get too much going between now and November 8th, but certainly once November 8th comes around and we have a definitive answer, we'd want to be able to move. But with that said, the Transportation and Parking Commission has been very active on this particular item. They are doing the research and the groundwork now to understand the model that is in place in Danville and how that model was successful, and how it may or may not apply in Los Gatos, and how we could structure a program here to take advantage of that. And that's on the school busing side. The on-demand busing for sort of serving local residents more broadly in town is another effort. And there's been a little bit of work on that, but not as much.
Let me follow up on that because the three components that are significant for me is the Danville model, the traffics. I call it the VTA flex busing, but I guess you call it the on-demand busing, and then the park and ride. Those to me are defined. They're not pots of money that you have to compete for. So is there a lot of work in terms of time in order for us, Los Gatos, to get prepared for the traffics, for the flex, for the park and ride?
There is a lot of work, yes. I think there are different stages, so I think the park and ride may have a little bit more behind it, especially given that it has funding through Measure A to get it going. And my understanding is negotiations on the property acquisitions are underway, so those are good steps that are already occurring. Both the flex model has had some challenges with VTA, so figuring out how to make that work in Los Gatos, where it didn't work for them in North San Jose, it will take some work and some convincing, and we'll have to spend some time on that. In terms of the school busing the traffics model. When they implemented that in Danville, they did a major study behind it. The study identified where it had potential for success, what format it would have potential for success in, what the demand is, and that would be one of the questions that we would I think want to answer is there demand, and where is that demand in Los Gatos? So there's a significant amount of front work. The questions start to become: do we want to undertake that work as a town proactively under town funds to start to move things along, or do we need to craft a bigger program that starts with a study but provides a progression through with maybe an implementation over several years following the actual beginning of the sales tax initiative?
Where, I understand that Parks and Public Works has a lot on its plate, but where will those decisions be made? I.e., this is the end point for traffics. This is when we want the decision made, and we have to back out X amount of time to get there by that deadline. When are those decisions going to be made? Have they been made? Where are we in the process?
I would suspect November 9th would be when many of the decisions need to be made. If we're going to be there at the front of the line or towards the front of the line, we'll want to have a program in place or developing. Again, keep in mind this is a sales tax initiative that takes 30 years for all of the funds to come in. So that we're not going to get everything right out of the gate. We'll need to be strategic on where our successes are. If indeed the measure passes on November 8th, I think we'll need to, as staff, have a plan for how we move it forward. I don't see us doing it with our existing resources. I think the amount of work is significant. There's likely a good deal of in-house staff work, but also some work with some assistance from outside sources. And so we'll have to strategize on what that looks like and what the commitment from the council wants to be. We may want to bring that forward in a mid-year discussion so that you have the opportunity to weigh in on it and actually have it a thoughtful discussion on it in alignment with other priorities that the town may have.
Is there a mid-year discussion in December?
No, it's later in the year. It's sort of the March.
Oh, the mid-year.
Okay.
So you're thinking we might be waiting till then?
I think we'll have started to outline, where we need to be. But in terms of significant work, I don't know that we'll be able to get data or analyses done between now and then.
Other questions, Mr. Leonardis?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Mr. Morley, on that $350 million going to Highway 85 improvements, is that to make Highway 85 wider?
It is not currently set to make Highway 85 wider. The discussion currently, I think, is, and I'm sure I'll get some help on this one, the discussion currently, I think, is on a different kind of a transportation mode for the center of Highway 85, so a mass transit or a bus lane or something along that line.
Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I've been dying to add information on this. I was waiting till we got to this subject, so thank you, Mr. Leonardis, for taking us to 85. I want a couple things. Recently, a letter came out from the anti-tax advocates, however you want to call them, saying that 85, if you pass this, 85 is going to become a toll road, and that was an original idea. In fact, it was in the recommendation that went to the VTA board at the very beginning of June, and then it was pulled out so that the recommendation that they adopted in mid-June does not have 85 having any managed lanes on it. There was quite a few people that were against that. So that's even just converting the current HOV lane to a managed toll lane. So that was removed from it. So that's not going to happen, even though there's some letters trying to discourage people from voting for Measure B for that reason. The vision so I'm Councilwoman Jensen's alternate on the VTA 85 Corridor Policy Advisory Board, and had an opportunity to attend several times and was very passionately engaged. So I can say the vision of that group was to create a fast backbone in our transit system. Right now, if you live down in South San Jose, or even, I guess you could use Caltrain if you're maybe far enough down, but if you take light rail, it takes too long to get through downtown up to where most of the jobs are in the Mountain View and so forth. So everybody drives up 85 because it's still sitting in traffic is better than riding light rail through downtown. So the vision is to create another fast backbone. That backbone doesn't necessarily have to be light rail. It could be a rapid bus lane that connects either to light rail in Santa Teresa or other places up in Mountain View, and has all the different connections that a fast backbone would create. So the vision is to put another lane in. So there would be a widening of sorts, but it would be a lane for the rapid bus only. And at first that bus would not make many stops, and it would have to get through traffic. But then, I'm probably going too much detail, but the next step would then to be build stations in the middle of 85 so pedestrians can cross over and get on these buses that never have to cross the lanes of traffic on 85. So you could truly create a fast way of moving people up 85 and encourage people up, to Mountain View and the jobs up there, encourage people to get out of their cars. At the same time, in parallel, they're going to study what is the best alternative. Is it to continue the second phase of the rapid bus that I just mentioned with the stations, or is it to do some other kind of light rail or any other transit? So there is still a study to figure out what is the best alternative, but the point overall is there's no plan for more lanes for cars.
Further discussion? Ms. Sayak?
So I appreciate the discussion, and I understand that we have to wait till November before we can actually do much more work on this. What I do ask, though, is given the discussion that we've had today with schools, traffic, parking, there's so many things within this that we can tie together when we do our priority setting in January. I understand we need more data. We need things that can better feed these discussions. But I think there's so many opportunities to alleviate so many of the issues we talked about today if this measure is successful and we're able to just start on certain projects. So for the town manager, I just ask that we keep these priorities in mind and they come back to us in January so we can be a little bit more holistic in our thinking of how we want to expend staff resources next year.
If I could just catch one point on that, the work that we're doing with the study on safe routes around the schools and the bicycle and pedestrian master grant plan are absolutely ways that we position ourselves to be successful. Those are what the VTA, those are the types of programs that the VTA is looking at for a community to demonstrate that they're committed and that they have an idea of what they want to do with the funds. So I think those are great examples of where we've already taken significant steps towards being in a good position.
Other questions? Now, this is a public testimony, and the council has now completed its question. I do have one card. Diana Abadi. And anybody else wanting to speak to us, please submit a card.
Good evening, Mayor Spector and council members. Thank you so much for all of your work with Measure B and Matt Morley and our Laurel Prevetti, town manager. I just want to say thank you, first of all, for all of that work. This has been exciting. We've been working on this for, 3 to 4 years, and this is my 6th year as a superintendent. So to hear what's happening in Danville and the traffics model is really exciting. It's also scary for a superintendent who has elementary school students, who's got 3,300 students. I've already been approached by members of the community who live up in the mountains and would like us to have a bus come down from Lexington to the high school and to our middle school. So all I'm asking is that I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm volunteering myself. I cannot sit on any of the commissions, but I do know that our board, my board, our liaisons, and myself really want to be involved in any decisions that are made around schools, especially with the school busing system and how it affects our students. Mr. Morley has already updated us on that, but it's going to be really important in the success of that and the role of that we play a major role in how that gets implemented if Measure B passes. So that's all I'm just asking. And I can't believe I just did that. So.
Have you ever heard anyone turn down a volunteer?
No, I call them twirlers in my office because when they come in, I always assign them to some committee or something like that. So,
we have questions? None. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have no other cards. All right, I will close the public testimony portion of our hearing. Our recommendation was to receive a report. Is there anything further that we want from the staff side? Noting for the record that they're both shaking their head no. All right. Thank you very much. We will next go on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 10. Receive a report on pathway lighting options along the Forbes Mill footbridge. Staff report.
Thank you very much. So we were asked to take a look at the potential for doing pathway lighting along the Forbes Mill footbridge. We thought this would be a fairly straightforward, easy project, especially given the remnants of conduit and a former lighting system that was in place. Unfortunately, as we delved into this, what we found was that the power distribution system that was there previously is no longer viable. The power was provided from the adjacent businesses and is not in place and not accessible anymore. So it requires new power. New power means the setting of a new meter or accessing power from an existing meter. Setting a new meter would be an expensive proposition with PG&E and Caltrans. and identifying a location through that process. There is existing power at the other end at Forbes Mill, which is a potential source of power and one that we think is probably the most viable. And so we explored that, and that's where the budget amount of $75,000 came from. It's significant in that it requires trenching across the parking lot and through the landscaped areas to get power to the bridge, and then even at that point distributing the power through the lighting system. So not to give up, we wanted to take a look at the potential for LED lighting. So we've looked at to try to find commercial LED pathway lighting that might work there. One of their qualifications would be that it needs to be somewhat rugged so that it can withstand the abuse that it might take up on the bridge. We haven't been able to identify anything that would be viable to date, so we're continuing to work on that area with some additional resources, although still haven't been successful with that. So at this point, from a budgetary perspective, we're looking at about a $75,000 investment in order to implement lighting across the bridge. Our recommendation is that we would continue to source this and to look for alternatives and to bring it back again in January as we bring forward discussions on priorities and to see if we can't cobble together a capital project. And with that concludes staff's report.
All right, let me follow up. I read your report. This has been a project that is significant to me personally, in part because of the illumination from an aesthetic point of view for the student art, but also from a safety point of view, that is a very, very dark walkway, and it is a concern to me for any time that people are using that other than in daylight. I read your report, and I am mindful of what you said about the limited access to electrical power. I was interested in the LED lighting. I was interested in the LED pathway lighting. I researched enough or know enough that LED pathway lighting is being used more and more. And is viable in the sense of you can walk on it. Now, what kind of walking, you think might be necessary, I don't know. So are these the kinds of things that you will be looking at?
So I think the LED lighting, the LED aspect is a given. The LEDs are a very low draw and very energy efficient, and they provide a great pathway light. So that is a given. The power source is sort of where we're hung up a little bit in that running power from Forbes Mill is the most significant part, and whether it's regular incandescent lighting or LED lighting, it still requires the power. So that's where we went to the solar option, and we're exploring solar as a potential power source. And it takes a little bit more effort and on our end to try and source that out. We had thought that there might be some individual solar powered fixtures that would work. And we even tried ordering a couple of them to see what they look like, and when they came in, they're just not the quality that's going to last or provide the illumination that we need there. So we've gone back to the drawing board on that. We're continuing to explore that as a solution.
In order to try and avoid the time and expense of going back to the drawing board, from, again, staff's point of view, is there any process wherein you can send the word out to other cities and towns, municipalities? Have you done the solar, the solar lighting and used it on pathways?
We do have a distribution source that we can work with on that, absolutely.
Other questions? Seeing none, again, this is an opportunity for public input. I don't have any cards. Anybody want to address us on this agenda item? Seeing none, Mr. Leonardis. First of all, I'm going to close the public testimony portion of the hearing and go to Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Mr. Morley, was there any consideration about reaching out to the Community Foundation or some other community or grant process where we can get some funds for this project?
We have not reached out to the Community Foundation for an opportunity for funding or through other sources. No, not at this point.
Mr. Leonardis.
Follow-up question. So I'm envisioning this bridge, which is a very artistic bridge, which connects two artistic things. It connects our museum and our high school to Old Town. And it was kind of, when I envisioned a lighting project on here, I kind of envisioned something artsy, you know. And we're talking about LEDs as a possible alternative, but it would be kind of neat maybe to go out into the community and come up with some kind of a design or some kind of a lighting plan, and then see if we can raise funds, perhaps privately, to make this really kind of a work of art, to continue the tradition of the work of art on that bridge, as opposed to something that's very ordinary.
Let me follow up on that. I always had an artsy, to use your word, image too. I had what I call the holiday lights strung near, above, or below the artwork, but that is not inconsistent with the pathway lighting that staff has referenced, because having now researched it, that can be artsy. So it is. It's not mutually exclusive. Further questions or discussions of staff? Seeing none and nobody to testify, we will close this hearing and go on to agenda item.
A question for the mayor.
Yes.
We're simply discussing it and receiving a report. We're not giving feedback to staff. We're just going to hear this in July when we come back to our budget.
No, I'm going to.
So there's no action.
I'm going to find the money in the next month.
I'm sure that you won't. So, given that we're not making a motion, I'm just sort of wondering on this one what we were doing.
Yes. What is staff looking for?
From our perspective, we're essentially in the formulation stages, as we would be for any capital program project. So we're still doing the investigation, and then that way, as we look at priorities and you identify what kind of capital projects you would like seeing in the next budget, we would have more information for you to make that decision.
Yes, and what I would see is, as with almost everything that has come before us this evening, I would look to this item going forward in January, I guess, where we would have options, cost, and then we would be looking at it in comparison with other options, and keeping in mind Mr. Leonardis's point about if we get a cost, then exploring, again, alternatives within the community for funding. Further discussion? Okay, now we're going on to next agenda item. Agenda item 11, discuss and adopt amendments to Council Policy 1-04 entitled Town Facilities Use Policy regarding Oak Meadow Park. Staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Shalane, and I'm here to talk to you about the Town Facilities Use Policy regarding Oak Meadow Park. The town currently does not have any policies or guidelines that outline parameters for large special event use at Oak Meadow Park. Recently, staff received an inquiry regarding using all of Oak Meadow Park for a special event. Council passed a facilities use policy in August that outlined the use of town facilities, which did not include Oak Meadow Park as a whole. The Council Policy Committee and staff are suggesting to amend the current facilities use policy to include Oak Meadow Park as a whole, rather than just Oak Meadow Park Bandstand as it currently is. The main amendments include changing the title from Oak Meadow Bandstand to Oak Meadow Park, not allowing the park to be completely closed, not allowing fee for entrance events, keeping public entrances open for all events, making sure these events have a special event agreement. So the main purpose of these changes is to stay consistent with the idea that public spaces are to be used for the public. I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions of staff? See none. Again, this is, let me see what our action item is here. Yes. First of all, this is a public hearing. I don't have any cards. Does anyone want to address us on this item? Seeing no one coming forward, I will turn to the council for discussion, questions, motion. We are looking for a motion here. Ms. Jensen.
I move that we adopt the amendments to Council Policy 1-04, our town facilities use policy, and thank you to Ms. Hammock. The policy committee's idea was that public spaces should be used for the public.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Agenda item 12. Review and discuss the Council Policy Committee's recommendation to amend Council Policy 2-11 entitled Commission Appointments.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll be brief and possibly turn it over to the policy committee members to follow up on their thoughts, because this matter has been brought to your policy committee. And the item before you is the policy committee's recommendations to amend Council Policy 211 entitled Commission Appointments. And if those amendments are acceptable, then there are many enabling resolutions for each one of those commissions that would also need to be changed or included in your package. We brought this forward to you in March 2006 to discuss and consider a staff recommendation to amend the policy. At that time, it was recognized that it had not been brought to the policy committee, so the council recommended that it go back to the policy committee for discussion and then back to you for a recommendation. Policy committee considered on many times March 24th, June 23rd, August 25th, September 29th, and October 13th. So they did spend a tremendous amount of time going over all the commission appointments and all their different commissions. And at some point, I think it was between the September and the October or in the August timeframe, the actual recommendations that policy committee were making were then even introduced at all the different committees to get their input. So there's been quite a bit of community input. I won't go through each separate committee and the changes. Those are on page 2 and 3. You can ask any questions if you need be, but they're all there, and how each one would be changed. We tried to be as consistent as possible between them regarding residency requirements and number of commission members. The other major change is the balloting process, though, and that is also changed. That would require, when we do balloting for the commission, that they would be done by written vote.
Thank you. Questions of staff. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So when I read the staff report, many of the changes to the commissions you have at the end, the commission is in agreement with the recommendation. So on the Parks Commission, you're ditching the Montessorino resident and cutting the commission size down, but I don't see that it was ever brought to the Parks Commission. Was it brought to the Parks Commission? And what was their response? Because there's nothing indicated in here.
Yes, we did bring it to the Parks Commission. We had a discussion at the last meeting with regards to the representation. The commissioner that represents Montessorino objected, but otherwise the Parks Commission was fine with the changes.
Follow up, if I could.
Go ahead.
So following up on the Montessorino, what exactly is the history behind having a Montessorino resident? Is Montessorino contributing to our parks, or I know they don't have any? Are they contributing any dollars, or do we just say you can use it?
So we did do some research into that exact question, and what we uncovered that we think leads to why there's a Montessorino resident on the commission is in the early 90s there was a statewide allocation of funds formulaically to cities for park use. Montessorino was a recipient as well. They, because they have no parks, they allocated their funds to a combination of Los Gatos and Saratoga for use in the parks in those two cities. So the town received those funds and expended them over a period of time with, as far as we can tell, the last expenditure around 2009 or 2010. Some of the projects including a contribution to the fountain at the plaza, some work at Oak Meadow Park, and that kind of project. It also aligns with the adjustment where Montesano residents are able to use our parks and park, for instance, at Oak Meadow at no cost, or make reservations at the resident rate.
So if I could summarize, so what you're saying is because they gave us money, we allowed them to put a commissioner on our commission to help allocate those funds, and since those funds are there isn't any more to allocate, we don't really need a Montesano commissioner anymore? Is that kind of the conclusion?
So I can say that the funds, there are no longer funds that are allocated from Montesano. The second question, I think, is a council question for the council through the policy commission.
Let me follow up on that. If I remember the staff report correctly, the Montesano representative did object to this new policy.
Correct.
And then, in light of that, did the commission as a whole vote and say, Montesano, we hear you, but we disagree?
This was not an action item for the Parks Commission. It was an information item as it was being handled through the council committee. So they provided their input through a sort of a consensus type around the table input session, but there wasn't a vote one way or another to support or not support the action.
Was there a reason for that?
It wasn't agendized for their action, just as we went to all the commissions to inform them about the respective changes. They had a discussion, and then we provided that feedback to the policy committee for their consideration. We did not ask the commissions to vote on this.
Thank you. Further discussion, or questions, I should say. Yes, Ms. Sayak.
As one member of the policy committee, I'll provide a little bit of feedback and just context. What we were looking at was just parity between all the various commissions. What we had heard through communication, not only at public hearing, as well as just communication we had gotten individually, was that some commissions allowed only Los Gatos Town Residents Incorporated, some did not, and ultimately it was getting confusing and what people perceived as unfair. And so we decided as a committee that for adult commissions that it should be limited to incorporated Los Gatos residents, and with exceptions to the Youth Commission as detailed in the staff report. One thing I do want to add that we also did agree on that was not reflected in this, I just found it. Under attendance requirements, we did ask that number 4 on page 2 of the policy, an advisory body member could be removed with 3/5 instead of 4/5, and if you could just reflect that change.
Now, this is a public hearing, and I do have a card, but before we go to that, any more questions of staff? Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I want to go the other place that we're moving non-Los Gatos residents and ask question. So currently we allow on the General Plan Committee a business owner in town that doesn't necessarily have to be a Los Gatos resident. What is the history behind that? I was assuming that maybe we felt they made such a contribution to the town and it's so invested that we'd allow them to have comments on the General Plan Committee, but I was wondering what is the history behind that?
Not aware of that specific history, I'm sorry to say, but I think in the light of having consistency across all boards and committees, the thought was perhaps we should remove or allow for a residency requirement similar to the others. They could still be a business representative, but they also would need to live in town.
Other questions? Ms. Jensen.
As a member of the policy committee, I had thought that we were removing this particular designations on the General Plan Committee so that we no longer had a designated business representative, a designated public representative, that we simply had representatives. So that was one of our issues that we didn't want to create those designations. We also, with respect to the General Plan Committee, and Planning Commission, we felt that since those were quasi-judicial or rulemaking bodies, that we wanted to make sure that people that were affected by the rules served on those committees.
For the other questions? Seeing none, I have some cards. If you want to testify, please submit a card. First one, Maria Risto.
Hi, Maria Risto, Transportation and Parking Commission. First of all, I want to thank the Policy Committee for the hard work that you did and for looking at all of the commissions to get attendance and selection processes and residency kind of uniform across the commissions. And I think what is really neat is the decision to put a youth commissioner on the commissions where there are not binding decisions. So Historic and Planning Commission and General Plan won't have a youth commissioner, but the other commissions will. And speaking on behalf of the Transportation and Parking Commission, we are excited to have a youth commissioner. And I can talk about two commissions because I also sit on the BPAC as a representative from Transportation and Parking. And one of the changes that will occur that you recommended and that we are behind is having the BPAC be comprised of all residents of the town and not co-commissioners. And as somebody who would lose my position on the BPAC as Transportation and Parking, I'm looking forward to seeing new residents on this commission. We've got a lot of residents that want to get more involved. We've had special meetings on the BPAC in the community. There's probably a list of 100 people that can be contacted through email, plus through all the town channels, and I think you'll see a lot of energy coming into it. So having started out the way we did, it was a good way to start, but I think this is going to be a great transition to get it to all residents and a youth commissioner. For the Transportation and Parking Commission, the only concern we had was when we add the youth commissioner, we may have to change our starting time because we meet at 7:30 in the morning, and with school starting at 8:15, that could be an issue. But unanimously, we were flexible about that and willing to start as early as Director Morley can start. So if we have to end up moving the meeting to 6:30 a.m. or something, we'll do that. But I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to know about our commissions.
Seeing none, thank you. And we also have Lee Fago.
Madam Mayor and council members, to provide some additional background to my earlier submitted request to amend the structure of the Finance Committee, that is to add well-qualified townsfolk with professional financial backgrounds, please note the following suggestions. The Finance Committee, made up of only 2 council members, but neither of which has a financial background, last met about 6 months ago. The new town budget was adopted about 2.5 months ago, and there are some alarming messages in these new figures in the budget. Over the last 5 years, the town budget expenditures, not including the net transfers in and out from the other set-aside funds, has our spending ramping up from $49.4 million in 2012-13 to this fiscal year's budget of $62.2 million, a more than 25% increase of almost $13 million in just 5 years for a town that still only has 30,000 folks. While scary big increases, especially since these expenditures did not yield the infrastructure improvements and maintenance our citizens have asked for, what is most concerning is that over the same 5-year span, the revenue has gone down and not up, from $51.8 million to only $49.9 million in the current fiscal year. It's a reduction of $1.9 million over the same period of time. Bottom line, we're spending way more and bringing in less revenue. Add this to the CalPERS retirement shortfall of more than $50 million, growing by 7% a year, and we are heading off of a cliff. Yes, we have some reserves, but they are limited and earmarked for multi-year projects, some of which are already underway or state mandated. So at the end of the current fiscal year, this year's approved budget will show a $12.2 million shortfall, not counting the CalPERS mess. We cannot stay the course due to the increasing debt that will soon force further reductions in personnel and infrastructure maintenance. Therefore, I am suggesting that the council act as quickly as possible to recast their perspective on how we develop our budget and manage our finances. Yes, you are hiring a new finance manager, but I strongly suggest the council amend their 2-council-member finance committee to at least 3 well-qualified citizen volunteers recruited directly from our very gifted community. Have the citizens engage in a multi-year commitment to a new finance and investment committee for the town. These volunteers should be qualified with a minimum of 5 years of financial management experience in either the public or private sector. That eliminates me. Further, they should meet no less than every other month to assist in the development of a 5-year capital budget and revenue projections and serve as an advisory body to the council.
Thank you. Questions of Mr. Fagot? Seeing none, thank you very much. I have no other cards. Does anyone else wish to address us on this agenda item? Seeing no one coming forward, I will go look to the council for motions, discussion. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. As one of the lucky council members who gets to serve on the Finance Committee, I've always wondered why it could not be a more in-depth thing, considering that money is the root of all happiness. Without the money, nothing happens. And when I look at things, as mentioned by Mr. Fagot, such as pension shortfalls and the Almond Grove streets we have to pay for, and potentially $4 million contribution to a parking garage, our pavement condition index is below 70. All the wonderful things that we brought up this evening about safe routes to school and funding those projects. The list goes on and on. Employee salary increases and things. I wonder how we're going to pay for it all. It's been worrying me so much lately that I feel like, resigning from this position, quite frankly, because I see it as a huge, huge problem for our town going forward. And I would like to do whatever we can, including with what Mr. Fagot said, explore this more in depth. And if it takes a citizens committee to get involved, I would welcome their help. So I don't know what we need to do. I see in the report here that this could be considered in January, but to me it seems more urgent than that.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Although I think that Mr. Fagot misrepresented some of the numbers, and I don't really appreciate that, I do tend to agree that I think our finance position in the future doesn't look like it's improving. It looks like it's decreasing. We have a declining sales tax revenue. We've got lawsuit costs coming up. We've got increasing labor and pensions costs. Almost yearly, our unfunded pension liabilities increase because CalPERS is not, their investments didn't come through or their assumptions were changed again. So I also concerned that we need to look at a little more carefully. So I think the idea of adding professionals with the right kind of experience to the Finance Committee could be a good idea.
Further discussion or motion? Ms. Sayak.
Not a motion, just more discussion. In the staff report that's provided to council, there's a lot of information, but there's also a lot more information that are part of the staff reports to the policy committee that speaks to the finance committee and whether or not we should add citizens. One of the things we discussed was, in many essence, the council committees are almost subcommittees. And if the intent of this larger look at finance, it really goes beyond the intent of the finance committee. And so is it better warranted to have a commission of citizens so that we can actually clearly put what the mandate is and intent of that commission, as well as the qualifications we would be looking for in these committee members. And that requires a lot more thought and effort that we didn't feel that we would have available to present today, but is something that could be thought out and put forward in January when we do our priority setting. I, for one, believe that there is merit to it, but I don't want to just create a committee and then have committee members then themselves start wondering, well, what is it we're going to do, and start creating work plans that goes beyond what the council itself feels is necessary to look at on a financial basis. So I think, speaking individually, I think there's merit to it. I just think the process and the mechanism to achieve those goals is not necessarily within the Finance Committee, and it's something that I would look forward to do on a commission level that we would then be creating.
Ms. Jensen?
Speaking as a second member of the Finance Committee, I echo what the Vice Mayor has just said. Another consideration for us is that in November we'll have a new mayor and vice mayor, and the mayor appoints the members of the various committees. So those could change over, and our budgeting is going to happen in January. We thought it was more appropriate to wait on such an important question until we knew who was in place, what money was available, and what we wanted to do. So that's one of the reasons we didn't come forward with it right away.
With regard to the Finance Committee, as being the other person on the Finance Committee, I think that waiting until January is a good idea. I don't know if it should, any community input should be part of the Finance Committee. Probably not. A separate commission, probably. But in order to make those decisions, one has to look at the charter for the Finance Committee and whether or not community members as part of that Finance Committee is part of the charter, or if we need to go to a separate commission. And whatever we do, whether it's an expanded Finance Committee or it's a separate commission, the mandates for that commission has to be examined carefully because you're, one, looking at staff that is going to have to support that commission. You're going to have to look at a commission that has to interplay with the council and also with regard to the finance department of the town. So it's not an easy snap your finger kind of thing, but it is a objective that is worthwhile examining and pursuing. Let's see. Oh, and then with regard to the testimony, there were various statements made in the testimony with regard to the finances that, the revenue is X and the expenses are Y, and indicating that the expenses are greater than the revenue. Items like that. I agree with, I don't know who said it, but there are answers to all of that. But we're not going to sit up here now and respond to all of those issues. But one should not assume that that information is on its face accurate. Further discussion. I don't think we have a motion yet. Mr. Leonardis.
I was going to make the motion and go with the recommendation on page 1 of the staff report.
Do we have a motion and a second? I'm going to support the motion, but there was one thing. I have this X by it here on my iPad, the balloting process. I'm going to support the change in the balloting process because I think using paper ballots makes a clearer record ultimately. I think it also, though, has a downside because if there is a second or third ballot that needs to occur, that means the clerk has to write up these paper ballots, pass them out, and then collect them. I think that could be cumbersome. My concern was that the recommendation for the change in the balloting process, if it was motivated by clarity in the public record, that's a good thing. But I was concerned that maybe it was motivated because council members are uncomfortable looking at somebody in the audience and having that person's name come up and not feeling comfortable voting for them or not voting for them. That I would think is not a good idea. I think that if that's the motivation, council members up here have to be prepared to look people in the eye and make the decision. Having said that, I'm going to support the motion. Further discussion. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I'm not going to support the motion. I have some concern about the questions I asked about removing the Montecito resident. I was on the Parks Commission, and it seemed to work quite well with the Montecito resident. They became, they were always one of the more active members on our commission. They were they were chair at least part of the time that I was there. I'm also wondering, I think it was stated that the reason for removing the non-resident or making it a resident requirement in the general plan committee was we wanted to make sure people making the rules were the ones that were affected by it. But general plan has a huge effect also on businesses in town. So to me, if you have a business owner, they're also very affected by it. So I'm just not yet ready to remove those people from these committees.
Ms. Jensen.
I just wanted to respond to the balloting issue on the commissions. The policy committee absolutely did not consider whether we had to look at someone we were voting against or not. In fact, our recommendation calls for paper ballots, which are made part of the record, and we anticipate that the names of the council members and for whom they vote are going to be part of each meeting, so that will be a more clear record and a more efficient way of voting.
Further discussion? I'm still going to support the motion, although I have to say that Mr. Rennie's points and arguments are strong. Further discussion? Wait a minute. I have two people. I'll start with town attorney.
I just want to make sure the motion did include that one item that we did miss, which would be the absentees, and that the council could remove them by 3/5 vote as opposed to 4/5 vote.
Let's see. Where's my motion here? Mr. Leonardis.
Yes.
And the second item that a policy committee mentioned, what committee member mentioned, was that we were going to remove the requirement for a business owner. We did not catch that change in making the resolution change for the general plan committee. So if it is the will of the maker of the motion to remove the owner of a business, we can make that change as well. And we apologize that we didn't catch that recommendation from the committee.
Mr. Leonardis?
That was my understanding, yes. And I could comment on that. When you vote for council members, you have to be a town resident. You cannot be a county resident. When you serve on our boards and commissions and you're appointed by the council members who were elected by the citizens, they're voting for you to be on the board or commission appointment. And to me, it only makes sense by the people for the people that the electeds who are elected by the people appoint the citizens of the town. And I do have, respect for the concerns that Mr. Rennie brought up. And I do remember, I think it was Gary Schlow on the Parks Commission. He did a wonderful job up there for us for many years. There is value in that. But I think of the appointment process and how it really should be. I mean, I recall recently we appointed somebody for the poet laureate, and they lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains. There's just some gray area, and I think it's great that the policy committee came up with these hard and fast standards, because it is the appointments will be appointed by the council who are elected by the people, and it should be within the incorporated part of Los Gatos. So,
all right. So. Maker of the motion agrees. Seconder of the motion, I think it was Ms. Jensen.
Yes.
And before we vote, because I'm thinking we're getting close to voting, I didn't want to neglect to thank the policy committee for all of this work, because this was a significant amount of work, and I especially appreciated the fact that the policy committee and staff went back to the various commissions and received their input before reaching their final conclusion. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Passes 4-1. Mr. Rennie voting no. That is our last agenda item. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.